This is an absolutely gorgeous facility, and I know that y'all are proud of it, those of you who live in Waycross. This is our 6th or 7th meeting and 7th, and we've got several more to go, and the next one's going to be in Albany next month. And then we are having to sort of wrap up to finish up what we have not finished up and to work on our report for the end of this year, and understand that this is a 2-year process, but we do not want to wait till the end of the 2nd year to start working. We have gotten a lot of good information, and we will be trying to introduce and to gear up for some legislation this year, and then we will get into the weeds next year with some of the more complicated issues, as if broadband and transportation and workforce development are not complicated enough. So anyway, I want to welcome you here today, and we're going to hear first from some of our local officials. We're going to hear from Mayor John Knox, County Commission Chairman Jimmy Brown, Jana Dyke, Executive Director of the Waycross and Ware County Development Authority. And so without any further ado, let's welcome them to the podium.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the city of Waycross, it's an honor to be able to welcome you to our city today. We certainly appreciate such a distinguished group being here in our community. I'm also proud to see that we have 2 of our local state representatives serving on this committee, and they've Jay Shaw and John Corbett. They've done a great job for us, and we certainly appreciate the work that they do. They come over here and see us and visit with us all the time, and they're just 2 hard-working guys who really care about this area of the state, and we certainly appreciate them. I wanted to tell you a little bit about where you are today. You know, every town in the state of Georgia has something to kind of hang their hat on. Atlanta's got a big old airport. What is it, still the busiest airport in the country? And we have a small airport here, and we can actually land any plane that lands in Atlanta can land right out here at our local airport. We have a 6,000-foot runway. We're proud of our transportation. We have 4-lane highways in all directions. We're a rail center, so transportation is really big in this community. But anyhow, Atlanta has a great big airport. Valdosta is known as Wintersville, USA, Savannah, and the tourism and the river walk over there. So every town likes to have something to hang the hat on, and I'm going to tell you what we have here in Waycross. Now, some people may say it's not much, but it's all we've got, and we're sticking with it. Listen carefully now so you can remember when you go home to tell your friends and neighbors about where you were in this big Rural Development Council meeting in Waycross, Georgia today. Waycross is the largest town in the largest county in the largest state east of the Mississippi River. Like I said, you know, some folks may not think that's much, but it's all we got, and we're sticking with it. Now, also, this area right up here has had some famous people. In 1941, Louis Armstrong performed on this, platform? Stage, okay, stage. Louis Armstrong performed in 1941. Cost you $1, but if you could afford it, you could go see Louis Armstrong. Hank Williams, Roy Acuff, Ella Fitzgerald, Jerry Lee Lewis have all performed here. And we have a couple of boards right outside. If on a break, you can go look at them if you want to. They're on each wall. There's also a poster that says, it was also, I believe, in 1956, they had a Grand Ole Opry show. They had 4 big name performers. Marty Robbins and Floyd Kramer were 2 of the 4 big name people. Then it also had in small writing, also performing will be, and it had 3 more names, and the last name was Johnny Cash. So out of 7 performers, he was the least prominent name at that point in time. So we've had some some of the greats. Elvis Presley, 1956, right here on this platform. 3 months before he went on the Ed Sullivan Show and became world famous overnight. But in 1956, you could go see him for $1, and there was, a list of other performers at that time. So some greats have performed here in Waycross. So I know you're going to hear from some very outstanding and prominent speakers today. So as you listen and learn and try to find new ways to help economic development in rural Georgia, just remember, pay attention, be serious, because you're working in the same place that some of the greatest people that have ever performed in America entertained our citizens. Thank you very much. We look forward to getting to see you out at the dinner tonight at the Swamp Park. I appreciate your willingness to serve on this committee. It's important to people like us down here in South Georgia, Jay and John, where they live. It's important that we get some help from the legislature to stimulate economic development in our part of the state. I know you guys are taking it serious. You're going to do the best you can for us. We appreciate it. Come back to see us anytime you can. You'll always be very welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bear. On behalf of the Ware County Board of Commissioners, we welcome you to Waycross and Ware County. I'm going to add just some few things to what the mayor was saying, and we're not going to retract. And I'm going to give this test question. He gave you part of it. Does anybody, now if I've told you, don't raise your hand. Does anybody know how many square miles is in Ware County? And we're the largest county east of the Mississippi. All right, Mr. Senator, don't you say nothing. Does anybody know? We had a Federal Aviation Administration official. I told him, and he won a contest in Atlanta. He said, "Do you know how many square miles is in Ware County?" He raised his hand, and they couldn't believe it. You live in Atlanta, and you know how big Ware County is. It's 906 square miles, folks. And it's good to see people from Atlanta, Georgia, because so many folks thinks that Georgia stops at Macon. It doesn't. It stops at the Florida line. Welcome. Thank you for coming and looking at our community. We welcome that. And we got an industrial development leader that's putting us on the map. It's coming alive. And we appreciate any and everything that you can do to help us. We appreciate it. And I'm going to stop with that. I'm not a holiness preacher. I'm just going to back away and let the folks that's come here to hear and listen. And I appreciate you coming and look forward to being with you tonight. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for making the journey south. As both Chairman Brown and the mayor said, we are very pleased to have such a large representation of the state through the various entities that we have. And Senator Harper, I know you kind of snuck in the back there. We appreciate you taking the time to come in. Peanut season's wrapping up, so we appreciate that effort. But what they've told you today is a little bit about our community, and I'm going to take what the mayor said that says that we don't have a lot to offer, and I'm going to blow that out of the water, guys. I think that we are the best community. We are set up as a transportation hub. It is an ideal topic to be discussed in our community. And our WWDA, which is what we call our Waycross Ware County Development Authority, has identified that through a recent, I guess you would say, soul searching. Our development authority has been reconstituted, and I took the position in January. And to say that we have been drinking from a fire hose since January is the understatement of the year. I'm going to go through, give you some of the exciting things that we have going on in our community, and then just kind of some of the things that we hear from the businesses when we go out and visit the businesses in our community, some of their needs. And if it's in one rural community, I can promise you that it's in another rural community. especially in the communities that may not have the transportation accessibilities that some of our larger communities have. And I know that that is probably a constant that you hear when you're going to these meetings. First, I'd like to show you our new logo. As they said, we have 4-lane highways coming in all different ways. CSX, Mr. Camuso's here somewhere, but they are a big player in our community. We are a rail community, and we are embracing that. As the mayor also said, we have a 6,000 square foot runway. We can land the largest plane that is made here in Waycross. So we know no limits right now. We have a wide open door, and we are going at 100% with that. Do I have the clicker, or do you have the clicker? So a little bit about our community. They've already told you some of the information, so like I said, I should have let the mayor know what all kind of we were talking about. But the city population, you can see here, we've got 14,000 residents in the city. So the new rule zone bill that you just passed, that applies to our community. And that's something that we are looking to take advantage of in our community. Our city government's working diligently to ensure that we get that information in time. Our community, the county population is right at 35,000. The daytime population, this is the mayor's elevator speech. I've heard him say it 1,000 times, and he says it better than anyone else. Our daytime traffic population is 60,000 on Memorial Drive. We service so many communities that are contiguous to us, and because of that, our traffic population during the daytime is double what our community population is. Our median income is $46,000, and our airport, as I said, is a 6,000 square foot runway. We have the Okefenokee Swamp. My chairman, Dr. Clark, back there will tell you how wonderful the Okefenokee Swamp is and what an asset it is to our community. You'll be able to go out there tonight and kind of look around at the swamp. I believe he has some exciting activities planned for you tonight, so we're really excited about that. And we have 2 industrial parks, and if you see that unemployment rate right there, our unemployment rate is lower than the state average unemployment rate. So we have got a great workforce here. And we also have the Rice Rail Yard, as the mayor mentioned earlier, and we still have the hump yard. Many of the hump yards are not in operation anymore, but we are blessed to still have that here. So that kind of gives us another added benefit. Some of the things that we've had that are going on, as many of you know, expansions and new growth, 80% of that comes from existing industry. Carolina Skiff is an industry that has been in our community for quite some time, and Carolina Skiff has recently come to the board of directors. They came prior to my taking the position and said, hey guys, we need to do something. And our board stepped up and did a great job. They've got a 100,000 square foot facility. We did economic impact of over $106 million, with our labor shed impacting all of these neighboring communities. And as I said earlier, that is where our 60,000 employees and people coming driving through town are coming in daily. This is the expansion that they did, so you can see the new building facility. We helped with mitigation of wetlands. We helped to get the site pad ready. And this is not something that the Development Authority could have done by ourselves. We did this with the partnership of the city and county governments. And all 3 entities working together have enabled us to do this. We're excited about this expansion. They have already started hiring new employees. They're hiring 100 new employees out at their facility. So that's one expansion that has taken place this year. Since January, the expansion came through. GATX, that is a rail-served business. They clean rail cars, they lease rail cars, and they clean them. We have a facility here in Waycross. We competed with a community in Texas, and we were very aggressive in our proposals to GATX. They were very pleased with our community. They were excited about some of the things that they saw going on in our community, and we were able to secure the expansion here. They had an $18 million capital investment. We have 45 new employees. The salaries for these jobs are going to begin from $45,000 to $65,000. If you know someone in welding, send them to Waycross, because these are welding jobs. The economic impact of this one is a $12 million economic impact. They're doing this through several different phases. The first phase will be improving the current property that they have on their site, their personal property, and then they will be doing an expansion on a 48-acre tract of land where they'll be laying some new rail for some sidelines there. We're really excited about that. And in the end, they did a $30,000 revenue bond, $30 million, revenue bond with the Development Authority here in town. And this is something that we haven't done in quite some time, so we're really excited about that. This clicker is throwing me off. Circle K, many of you know, Flash Foods started here in Waycross. It is now transitioned over to Circle K. I believe, second day at work, I got a call. We've got to go down to Flash Foods. They're thinking about moving. And so, of course, I didn't even know where Flash Foods was, but we went down there, and the mayor spearheaded that meeting. He took the initiative. He knew that we needed to keep this business here because it's important. These are some great jobs. They are in the accounting offices, and there's some good white-collar jobs in our community. We're proud to say that we were able to keep Circle K in our community, and not only were they, at the time of Flash Foods, servicing around 100 different facilities, now we're over 300 to 400 facilities that are coming out of the Waycross office. They've had some employees come to our community from Texas, some from Fernandina Beach, some from Orlando. So we're really excited about the growth just within that company. And it's still continuing to grow, so as that data comes in, of course, we'll be sharing that. And the Georgia Department of Economic Development has been a great resource for us. We're getting those announcements out through the Georgia Department of Economic Development, and we're really excited to have that partnership. Michelle Shaw's been a great representative for us in that aspect. So now that we've told you kind of about some of the expansions we've had, let's talk to you about some of these new businesses that we have that we can legally tell you about. The first one, maybe, Bailey International. Bailey International is a handmade egg roll company, and they make grade A hand egg rolls. And if the ladies that make these egg rolls, they roll them through like super quick. I mean, these ladies amaze me at the rate that they can put these out at. Their capital investment is $8 million, and they started out with 50 employees is what their goal was. They've now gone to 100 to 150 employees within the first year, because they're going to use their Waycross facility as a pilot for other sites in the future. Their open date will be November, we're looking at November the 13th probably, because they had to special order some of the assembly lines that coincide with that product. They're Quick Start qualified, so our businesses are taking advantage of the programs that are available through the state. And we're excited about that, because these programs they're going to be able to emulate in other communities, and they came from Georgia, so we're really excited about that. And again, had it not been for the partnerships with Georgia Power and with the EDC and our EMC entities, we couldn't have done this. And so we're very thankful to have that relationship that we have. Project Team. This is a project that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and my counterpart, Matt, is in the back there. Matt is the Executive Director of the Development Authority in Pierce County. Some of you may know about a piece of property that was located in Pierce County, and now it's in the city of Waycross. We were able to get a prospect to come to that land, so we're able to work together as two communities on a regional project. Regionalism is the buzzword right now, and we're doing it right here, and we're excited about that. This is going to be a senior living facility. They have them in several other communities, but this is not just your typical senior living facility. This is going to be a senior living facility that's like going to the country club. We are really excited about this project that's going to be coming down the pipeline. Again, about a $10 million capital investment with 55 jobs. Those jobs will vary from someone to cook and clean to those that are actually the administration there. So the salary ranges are kind of varied there. And again, we're working with our neighboring community, and in today's world, that is so important for us to work together, and we're excited to say that we are doing that. We are expected to do the groundbreaking in the next few months, so you will be getting some information about that groundbreaking, and we would like for you to attend if you're able to. So, in saying all that, there's some other projects that we have going on, and I'll get to that here in a little while, but those are some of our new projects. Y'all, I could sit up here and talk to you until 5 o'clock about all the exciting things we have going on at the Development Authority, but I think Mr. Tim would get on to me if I continued much longer. So I'll let you know kind of what we're hearing from our employers when we go out and visit. We are doing what many communities do, which is a business and retention expansion program. We go out and visit our existing industries. And through these visits, these are some of the feedbacks that we've gotten from them. We can't find employees that can read a tape measure. We can't click the button. The last 5 applicants failed their drug test. The employees have no way to get to work. They need more welders. I'm going to take a minute here and get on my platform, and Representative Shaw, I know he's heard this before, so he's just going to have to bear with me on that. In particular, the one that says that the employees have no way to get to work, there are several businesses out here that are providing incentives to their employees if they offer rides to their coworkers. In my opinion, it would be ideal if we in turn use that concept and incentivize the businesses that are giving those incentives to the employees. We have tax credits for various things, and I think that this would be a great use of tax credits for our employers because they're hitting their bottom dollars, and if we could do that to help them in South Georgia in particular, where we do not have the transportation, that would be a great added benefit for us as a development authority when we're going out to talk to these employers. Just so you'll know, these are some of our community educational partners. It has been really, really, really hard for me to cheer for a Gator. I'm just going to admit it. But someone told me it's a Ware County Gator. I have to continue to tell myself that. But we have enjoyed going to the games. But our high school has done a phenomenal job at working together with us. We have a representative from our high school somewhere here today in the crowd. And they have a CTAE program. We're working on implementing some additional programs from the former Move On When Ready, the high demand career initiatives. So our community has identified the need, and we're making the strides to do what we need to do so that we can continue that employee pipeline for our employers. We are blessed to have 2 colleges in our community. We have Coastal Pines Technical College, and we have South Georgia State College. Both of those colleges have seen an increase in enrollment over 9% since January of this year at their Waycross facilities. So even the community is seeing the investment and the opportunities of staying local and beginning their careers here. What to expect from the Development Authority? We have a new website that will be up very soon. We're really excited about that. As many of you know, economic development starts at the website, and you can get eliminated before you get even looked at on the ground level. So we're really excited about our new website, and that'll put us at a level playing field with many other communities. We have several new rail projects that we're looking at trying to implement here in our community. We've been working with Aubrey Brown, our representative, to identify these sites and how we can make these sites work. Again, we've seen that this is a strength for our community, and we want to try to continue to embrace that strength. Future distribution projects, again, we've identified that that is something that we are just set up logistically for. So that's a sector that we are going to be targeting in our community. And then, evidently I clicked very quickly. We have our commercial park, which many of you may have driven by on Highway 84, and that's a park that we just really haven't enhanced or embraced. And so we're looking at some One Georgia funding and some ways that we can improve the infrastructure on that park to make it more enticing for some businesses to locate in our area. Dr. Clark, I believe, has come up over to the side. I didn't know if he may want to add a thing or two about the Development Authority. If you don't, that's fine. But I know that he has.
Just briefly, I know that you're going to stay on time. Just briefly, we are certainly looking forward to hosting you tonight at the Okefenokee Swamp Park for supper. As you know, the Georgia Department of Agriculture is again going to be providing the meal, and it's going to be Georgia grown, and the refreshments will be Georgia grown as well, starting with the Coca-Cola Company and ending with some others as well. I understand that you're going to try to keep a tight schedule. Mr. Bearden has been cracking the whip on us as well for the last few weeks. That you'll be leaving here about 5 o'clock to go to the Hampton Inn, and there will be buses picking you up. The first van will leave at 5:30, and the last van will leave at 5:45 to go to the Okefenokee Swamp Park. We'll have supper there, and hope that you enjoy that. If you get there in time, we do plan a reptile feeding for you. For those of you who are down here and are worried about alligators, interestingly, they are no longer feeding. They will not eat again in this part of the world until April. So if you see one, he's not going to bite your foot off, but they're still moving around some. I do think we would be remiss not to also claim as our local representatives that are here, Jason Spencer and Chad Nimmer, who we very much appreciate being part of your house and part of the rural development, and Jason Shaw. As much as we love your daddy Jay, we know that you're Jason as well, and we're glad to do that. So once again, we welcome you to Waycross and are so glad to have you here. And if there's anything that any of us can do for you, please do not hesitate to let us know. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. What did I say? And Senator Harper, sorry. And Senator Tyler Harper, where are you? Stand up. Oh, there you go. Thank you. Thank you.
The good doctor just then mentioned that some reptile exhibits, and Jay's a little bit confused. He said it ain't church night, so he wasn't sure about handling snakes on a Tuesday night. So, moving into our program this afternoon, we're going to hit transportation hot and heavy today. So starting out at the coast, actually, at the ports, we have Lee Beckman with us for the Georgia Ports Authority. Lee's going to come forward and tell us a little bit about what's going on there and update us on the harbor expansion and some of the other records that they've been setting over the last few months. And things are really getting busy in Savannah. So, Lee, we're glad to have you with us. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you guys for having me and for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing and our efforts to help the entire state, but particularly the rural areas of Georgia, help create more jobs and opportunities. I was really excited to hear Jana's presentation. That is very exciting to see that, especially that unemployment rate of 4.9%. Many counties, in the more rural areas of our state are suffering at a much higher unemployment rate. So I'm glad to hear that she's got a lot of folks knocking down her door to move in. We have a lot of great things going on at the port, and I know you guys know we've got 2 deepwater ports, one in Savannah, one in Brunswick. The one in Savannah has been going gangbusters. I'm not going to focus on that today, but Brunswick, we are serving a number of different commodities. The large one, as you're going towards Jekyll Island from here, is Colonel's Island facility, which is the second largest auto facility in the nation. If you're driving to Brunswick from here, you'll pass a lot of Kias parked at the racetrack over there, just inside the Glenn County line. Those are a lot of Kias. We import all the Kias that we don't manufacture in the state are imported through Brunswick to serve the southeast. The Mayor's Point's right in downtown Brunswick. We're serving a lot of forest products through that facility, whether it's lumber or rolls of paper or whatever different types of commodities that you might imagine us making out of the paper. And then in East River Terminals, we're moving a lot of biomass wood pellets through there. Now, the facility here, Georgia Biomass, actually ships their products through a private terminal in Savannah, and there, as I understand it from Barry, I don't see where he's sitting, but they're almost at capacity right now. Can't move any more wood pellets, so it's a good problem to have. And then Fram is shipping a lot through Brunswick, and they're seeing a lot of growth there as well. I always tell folks Georgia's the Saudi Arabia of pine trees, so as biomass becomes more prevalent, we've got a lot of fuel to serve the world. In Savannah, we have our ocean terminal facility, which is kind of a catch-all facility. There's all different types of cargo, whether it's forest products, roll-on, roll-off cargo, or auto machinery units or containers. And then Garden City is our big facility that I'm sure everyone's heard of. It represents about 85% of our business. We like to use this photo because no other single terminal in America can show you a photo with 24 ship-to-shore cranes serving 8 vessels at one time. So we've got Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. It's the busiest airport in the world. Savannah's Garden City Terminal is the busiest and largest single container facility in the Western Hemisphere. So a lot of space. We're at 3.85 million TEUs this year. I'll get to that in a second. Do have a significant impact on the state's economy. 370,000 jobs statewide. This is based on our 2014 numbers. University of Georgia is going to be updating those numbers this year. 3.85 million TEUs. You see where we were 4 or 5 years ago. A little bit less than 3 million container units. That's moving through, truck and through rail. About 80% truck, 20% rail. We expect to see a lot of growth in rail. We'll get to that in a second. We hope to move about 4 million container units this calendar year. And that'll make us one of 16 single terminals in the world that move that many container units in one fiscal year or one calendar year. And so it really sets us apart from the rest of the hemisphere. No one in North America or South America is doing that. We are the fastest growing port in America, have been over the past 10 years. It's hard to continue that growth, but we're finding new ways to do it, always looking to expand our capacity and invest in our facility as well as the roads and rail around the state to grow capacity for us and serve the entire state of Georgia. We're seeing a lot of changes in our industry right now as well. I'm sure you all know the Panama Canal has expanded. We're moving through our first year. The Panama Canal's expansion was completed in about July of last year. And what we're seeing is a change in the size of vessels that are calling on us. These vessels are they used to hold, about a year ago, our largest vessel held about 8,500 container units. Just last month, we saw a vessel that held 14,000 container units. So you're seeing ships almost twice the size of what we saw even just a year ago. And they're bringing more cargo per stop. And so we've got to be able to flush that cargo through our facility and serve the needs and the demands that these vessels are calling on. But with these larger vessels, you see a lower per unit cost. So you're seeing cost savings to our nation. And these cost savings allow us to serve a greater portion of the country. You see here, the light blue area is the area that's now best served by East Coast ports. If you were to draw a line from Dallas to Chicago, everything east of that line would be 70% of the U.S. population. And so a larger percentage of the U.S. population is now best served by East Coast ports, and we've got to be able to accommodate those demands. I don't know why I keep going forward. Because of the expanded canal, these larger vessels keep calling on the East Coast, and they've chosen 3 ports. New York to serve the North Atlantic, Norfolk to serve the Mid-Atlantic, and Savannah to serve the South Atlantic. These larger vessels require us to increase our capacities, whether it be on our terminal, whether it be on the water leaving, or the river leading to our facility, or the roads and the rail leading from our facility, are going in the opposite direction with exports. Y'all do know that we are working on a harbor deepening. It's nearly 30% complete now. We are waiting on some federal funds, so if you guys talk to the president, please tell him to put some money in the budget for us. The federal government has been not as forthcoming as the state government has been, but we are working on that. Mitigation is nearing a point where we can start deepening on the inner harbor, which is inside the mouth of the river. The outer harbor is getting closer and closer to completion every day, and we're very excited about this opportunity. The issue with these vessels is about 70% of the vessels that call on Savannah have to wait on a higher tide to come or go. And I think it's really important for folks to understand that most of the ships that leave Savannah are drafting more water than when they came in. If you think about the commodities that we grow in our state, that we export to the world, 40% of American poultry exports are flowing through Savannah, coming out of all over Georgia, but everyone knows Gainesville is the poultry capital. All the pine products that are grown in our state, predominantly in South Georgia, are going through our facilities on containers. All of the kale and clay being mined out of Middle Georgia are being exported through these facilities as well. There's a very dense, very heavy commodities. You add the peanuts, the pecans, the cotton, all the other stuff that we export, very dense compared to a container full of T-shirts or a container full of televisions. So we're requiring that additional draft, and it really is impacting those agribusinesses a great deal more than it is the retail businesses and even the manufacturers. And so it's incumbent upon us to get that deepening done so that we can serve those businesses more capably. Now on terminal, we've put in a significant amount of money over the past 10 years. We're putting in a significant amount more in the next 10 years. That's going to allow us to serve the demands of international trade. We got to grow our capacity here. We got to have the capacity on the river. We got to have the capacity on the land side to move that cargo as efficiently as possible. If we're not moving cargo efficiently, then Jana's not seeing the same number of folks calling on her to try and move cargo to Waycross or from Waycross. And so we've got to be able to accommodate those demands and get that cargo, those containers, to and from Ware County. I don't want to get too far into this, but I know we're going to have a lot of folks talking about this. HB 170 is essential to the success of our facilities. You've got to be able to get the trucks over the road. We talk a lot about commuter traffic moving through Atlanta, but the improvements for commuter traffic also help access for our freight corridors. And so we've got to be able to move this cargo through the state to serve our customers and to serve the needs of all the businesses in Georgia. We're also looking at ways to increase capacity via rail. We've got a number of inland terminals that we're working on. Obviously, Atlanta was created and was born as a rail yard. We've got one now in South Georgia, in Cordele. We're working on one up in Northwest Georgia. The Northwest Georgia facility is very interesting. We import 40% of American flooring products to the Dalton area. And those flooring products go all the way up full, but those empty boxes have to be returned to the port or to a container yard, because that way they'll stop charging the customer for rent on that box. So by having a facility up there, we'll be able to return those boxes to that area and not have to move an empty box all the way through the entire state of Georgia to bring it back to our facility. That empty box can stay up there and wait for an exporter to ask for it, so we'll reduce costs for that exporter to get that box to them, and then they go through the state one time instead of having to go through the state 2 times. That reduces demands on the roads, reduces maintenance issues as well, and of course, it's improving safety. Now, excuse me, we are working on a larger project. We did get some federal funds for a mega rail project, which will combine our CSX and Norfolk Southern facilities and allow us to build unit trains in Savannah, bypassing the hubs here and in Florence and in Atlanta, and hopefully freeing up some capacity in those areas so that they can better serve domestic cargo as well as the demands for moving freight through the state via rail. That'll also allow us to serve a greater area in the country, building unit trains in Savannah, going straight to Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis, and Atlanta, of course. This project has already bared fruit. We've got a new resin project out of Texas to move in some resins as exports through Savannah because of this announcement. So, investing in rail, investing in roads, investing in our facility and on the water is going to help us serve our state, more capably. CSX and Norfolk their operations will be separate, but it'll allow us to focus all of our rail operations in one area. What it's also going to allow us to do is to remove a lot of the switching that's happening off terminal currently, which impacts the local neighborhoods and commuters a great deal. Instead of switching back and forth into our terminal, when they leave, they're going all the way out. When they come in, they're going all the way in. So we'll see a lot of efficiencies there. We're also going to double our capacity from about 500,000 containers per year to about 1 million containers per year.
Other questions? Tom?
If I could ask an agriculture question.
Yes, sir.
You've talked all about Savannah and the ports there and containers.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question about the Brunswick port
Yes, sir, you can.
and the Buck facility that
Yes,
got
sir.
closed?
Yes, sir.
That a lot of raw ag products come in and a lot of raw ag products are shipped out that cannot,
Yes, sir.
or people don't have the ways to containerize them. Is there
Yes, sir.
anything going on with redoing it or reopening it or?
We've been seeing over the past few years a reduction in the use of the AgriBulk facility in Brunswick. We had a long-term contract with a company called Bunge out of St. Louis, who exported a good amount of grain through that facility. Recently, it's been a lot of soybean meal, but in years past, it's been dried distiller's grain, a couple other commodities as well. It's been predominantly export. We have, and on a couple of occasions imported, predominantly some corn, which would be going to use for feed, but again, mostly export. That facility, again, was seeing a declining use, and we had a few months left on our contract, which we had extended with Bunge, and then the hurricane came through. We experienced nearly $1 million in damage to that facility, and with the contract running out, decided not to renew or continue with that facility. So that facility will be closed. We will be working with our customers on helping them find ways to move their cargo, particularly the Georgia customers. With much of that cargo going out of the Midwest, it's being used best served by the Mississippi via barge. But we are working on that as we speak. Yes, sir.
I worry about a monopoly being created.
Yes, sir.
And price differential.
Yes, sir.
That's
I'll get with you and get our folks to talk to you a little bit about what we're looking at, and make sure you're happy with where we're going. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Well, Lee, I think you taught us everything we must need to know about the port
I
today.
hope so. I'm happy to stay after if anybody has any questions they were embarrassed to ask in front of other folks.
All right.
So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, next up, someone else we've known for quite a while, Seth Milliken. He is Vice President of Public Affairs at Brock Clay Government and Public Affairs, but more importantly, Seth has been working with us for several years as we worked on House Bill 170 a couple of years ago, our Transportation Infrastructure Act. And Seth has become kind of the clearinghouse or know-it-all on transportation issues in the state of Georgia, and he's going to give us a presentation today from the Georgia Transportation Alliance. So, Seth, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here. When you work in Georgia in the transportation industry, having to follow the Ports Authority is kind of like being a singer with Johnny Cash opening for you, so I'll do my best. It's good to be here. I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize Dr. Clark. Appreciate his leadership as a member of the Chamber's Board of Governors, and several of my board of directors are here as well. Craig Camuso with CSX, Connor Poe with Norfolk Southern, Mark Middleton, Kathleen Bennett with ACCG, and I think I got everybody. You always run the risk of forgetting somebody. Some of this information has already been covered today in Lee's presentation, and y'all heard from my boss, Chris Clark, the Georgia Chamber earlier in this process, so I'm going to fast forward through some of these as much as possible and kind of focus on the discussion for today and investment in Georgia's broader infrastructure network moving forward. This is just a slide that outlines some of our major assets, and Lee talked a little bit about that today. At the Georgia Transportation Alliance, we have a pretty simple goal, and that is to see Georgia as the transportation and logistics capital of the United States. So when you think about North Carolina, you typically think about banking. When you think about Nashville, you think about healthcare. When you think about Dallas, you think about telecom. From our perspective, Georgia is uniquely positioned to be a state that anywhere in the United States, you think about Georgia, you think about transportation and logistics. And if you think back over the last several decades, it's been a lot of visionary leadership that has gone into that planning and that investment process, particularly with Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport, and then with our ports down around the coast. And we would really like to see the state build on that and continue that legacy of leadership and becoming a transportation and logistics hub for the country. This is a statistic that y'all have already seen. As I mentioned, Chris Clark gave a presentation earlier in the process, but when we look at the state's future from a transportation standpoint, our number one challenge is growth. That's also an opportunity, but when we look at population changes, Georgia is one of the fastest growing states in the country. You talk to some economists and they'll tell you that we could be the 5th largest state in the next 10 or 20 years in the United States. And that's our number one challenge. It's also our number one opportunity. We're looking at over 1 million people added to the state over the next 10 or 12 years. With that, let's see here, make sure I'm operating this correctly. With that comes challenges in different ways for different areas of the state, and obviously when we look at the state from a geographic standpoint, we have the Metro Atlanta region, which is 11 counties. Then we have 8 counties around the state like Macon and Columbus and Augusta that we look at as hub counties, as regional employment centers. But then the balance of the state, which is 140 counties, is rural. And that's why we're here to talk about these issues today. So transportation is a huge challenge. And I would encourage you as we go through the conversation today to listen for some common themes. Dana talked about a couple of things earlier. I promise we did not coordinate in putting these presentations together. And I think you'll hear some common themes as we go through the conversation. Georgia has the 4th most distressed counties in the United States. Most of those counties are rural. And the way we get that information, there's a national service that does a ranking of distressed counties around the country. They use 8 different factors like poverty and housing and workforce development and things like that. The vast majority of those distressed counties are concentrated in the rural areas of the state. And that's important from a transportation perspective for one primary reason. Folks like me, 12 different sets of plans and data, aggregated all of those together, and so we came up with kind of a rubric of sorts to start looking at the next 10 or 20 years and figure out what should we be investing in and where should we be looking. And at the end of the day, we came up with kind of a summary statement that goes like this: Georgia needs an integrated vision for connection and mobility, statewide industry development, getting back to that job creation and job access issue, and better partnerships between business and government. So out of that study, we developed 4 major statistics, and if these are if we're talking needs scenario, these are really the 4 major statistics that I'd leave with you today. One, we've already talked about the population explosion. We're one of the fastest growing states in the country. With people come a lot of cars. We're looking at another 1.5 million cars across the state of Georgia by the year 2030. Lee, I can't restate any better what he already talked about in terms of the growth that we're going to see coming into the ports. And those containers are going to go onto our roads and onto our freight rail network. So huge explosion of growth coming there. And then we'll talk a little bit more about Hartsfield-Jackson a little bit later. They're the 12th largest air cargo airport in the country, and they're looking at adding another 130,000 flights in and out of that airport a year. Right now they're doing about 980,000 or so. So from our perspective, transportation in rural Georgia, there's really two key components to success. On one hand, you have planning and you have priorities, and I think that's one of the things that we're talking about today. And then on the other side, you have the investment scenario. And I think over the last 8 or 10 years, we've seen a growing, strong legacy of leadership on that investment piece. And we know that investment works. Let's see here. There we go. We know that it works. We know that it's already working. We've seen T-SPLOST pass in 47 counties around the state. 3 regions passed it in 2012. Fulton County passed it last summer, and I think, Kathleen, we've probably got, 8 or 10 different counties that are putting it on the ballot here in a couple of weeks in their communities. One of the things we saw coming out of 2012 was what we like to call T-SPLOST envy, where you had the counties and the communities that didn't pass that, looking at the counties that did pass it. They're seeing the cones, they're seeing the barrels, they're seeing the progress around these industrial parks, and it's really incentivizing them to want to use that mechanism for growth in their communities. And then secondly, we've all talked about the passage of House Bill 170 in 2015. We're already seeing good things come out of that. So from our perspective, there are really 3 primary buckets moving forward in terms of looking at policy and investment scenarios. The first one is major mobility, and that's that conversation about roads, bridges, and continued investment in the road networks that we use to move products and services and people around the state. The second is an increasing area of focus for us, and that's how do we move freight around the state of Georgia. And you're going to hear more from the rail industry later today, but from our perspective, that really needs to be a key focus moving forward. And then the final bucket is transit and moving people in our communities. Most folks don't realize that we have 120 different transit systems around the state of Georgia. And going back to that job access issue that we were talking earlier, in many communities, that's the only way people have to physically get access to a job. And when you talk to economic development folks and folks in the business community, and you're talking about that job access issue, there are intangible issues and there are intangible barriers to job access, and then there are tangible barriers. The intangible barriers might be drug issues or lack of educational opportunities. On the tangible side, it generally boils down to transportation. Can people get from point A to point B, which is where that job might be? Let's see here. So from our perspective, in terms of actual issues and initiatives, there is a portion of House Bill 170, and that's better for local governments around the state. So we want to continue to partner with local communities and encourage them to utilize that mechanism to invest in infrastructure in their communities. And then when it makes sense, to encourage them to do that in a regional fashion that was mentioned earlier, and the fact that approaching infrastructure investment in regional approaches allows for bigger projects with more regional impact. Believe it or not, there are still areas in rural parts of the state that have congestion challenges. If you go to some of these core counties like down around Savannah, Augusta, Columbus, there are congestion issues. They're nothing like Metro Atlanta, but those are job access issues for folks that are in the rural regions around those counties. So continued wise use of those dollars to address those congestion challenges where they're present. On the freight and logistics side, just a couple of statistics to throw out there to complement some of the things that Lee talked about. Of all the cargo that comes into the port of Savannah, 82% of it goes on a truck. Only 18% or so goes on rail. So that's a lot of trucks, that's a lot of wear and tear on the roads, and it's a lot of congestion. It's a lot of cost for shippers when they're stuck in traffic. I'll never forget a statistic I heard from one time from the CEO of UPS, and he used this statistic, I think, kind of paints a picture of what the impact of congestion is for shippers that are using trucks specifically. He said if every one of our trucks sits in traffic for just 5 minutes a day, we lose $105 million in a year. That's real money. So shipments by destination, if you look at the value of the shipments that are coming into the Port of Savannah, roughly half of them are coming to a final destination somewhere here in the state of Georgia. The other half are going somewhere else. About 25% are going to states that are contiguous to Georgia. The other ones are going Phoenix or Trenton or somewhere else around the country. Lee talked about the increase in traffic, and we're just going to continue to see that grow over the next 10 years. As I mentioned, Hartsfield-Jackson is the busiest airport in the world in terms of passengers. It is also the 12th largest cargo airport in the world. Last year, they handled about 650,000 metric tons of cargo. Their goal is to handle 1 million metric tons of cargo a year. That would move them into the top 5 in terms of cargo airports in the country. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because y'all are going to hear from the true industry experts here a little bit later, but rail is a significant component of our freight and logistics network around the state. In 2015, Carol and the team there at GDOT updated our state rail plan. We have 2 Class 1 railroads and 29 short lines that are responsible for about 4,600 miles of track across the state. In 2011, they moved about 4 million cars. Predominantly coal, chemicals, food, farm products, and those companies support about 6,000 jobs across the state of Georgia every year. Let's see. Lee hit on these, so I'm just going to touch on them very, very quickly. We do, at the Georgia Transportation Alliance, we do spend a fair amount of time working with our congressional delegation in D.C. Savannah Harbor Expansion Project will continue to be our top priority there, and encouraging the federal government to hold up their end of that deal to get that project done. And I think it's important when we talk about the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project, it's a great priority for Georgia. It's also a great priority for the southeastern United States, because enabling those shippers to move those goods into the Port of Savannah on those larger ships means incredible cost savings for them, and it's a benefit to the southeast U.S. And then accelerating the delivery of Network Georgia, which is that network of inland ports around the state, will be critical moving forward. So from our perspective moving forward, when we're talking about freight, our number one goal is to see these trucks get outside Metro Atlanta. And from our perspective, that's really important for 3 reasons. If you're a shipper, it means quicker, more efficient times to market. You're able to move your goods more quickly, more effectively, and you're able to do it in a more cost-effective manner. It's great for people that live in Atlanta because it reduces congestion on our interstates inside 285. But it's good for rural Georgia too, because those trucks are driving through these rural communities, they're stopping, using the hotels, or using the gas stations. That's where we begin to see that ripple effect of the economic development in rural counties around the state. So we're in the process of going through developing a strategy to begin to move some of those trucks outside 285 and route them through rural parts of the state. And then statewide transit strategy, as I mentioned, there's 120 different transit systems around the state, and we certainly want to see the appropriate amount of resource and development there. Obviously, Chairman Tanner and the House Transit Governance Commission, and with Representative Shaw is serving on that as well. We'll continue to work through the end of next year, and we look forward to supporting the outcome of that commission as well. That's a lot of info. I know it's a lot to think about. We're obviously happy to answer questions, provide any updated information on any of this as well, but appreciate the opportunity to be here and be part of the conversation.
All right. Any questions?
Next, we're going to talk about rural mobility and transit, and certainly that's one of the areas that's going to be of interest to all of us, is how do we connect people with jobs who don't have a way to get there. And what do we do about transportation for people who need access to medical care? And with the other issues of in the criminal justice reform and other things like that where transportation is an issue. This was going to be sort of a roundtable discussion. Chris Tomlinson, who's the executive director of the State Road and Tollway Authority, is going to lead it off, but we're going to also have joining him David Castle, Carol Comer, Leanne Trainer, James Peoples. So let's give them a welcome.
Members of the roundtable, come on up and have a seat. So I see Carol and Leanne and Dave. We'll go and get started. First off, good afternoon, Chairmans Powell and England, members of the commission, and of course our hosts from Waycross, Ware County. Thank you for this opportunity to come before the commission here. Again, my name is Chris Tomlinson. I serve as the executive director for the State Road and Tollway Authority, as well as the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. I also serve as a member of the House Commission on Transit. So wear several different hats. I assure you it's only one paycheck, but oops, don't like that. But today, here to talk to you about rural mobility and transit. And for us, and for the practitioners and the agencies here, we normally refer to this area as rural human services transportation. Now, with all those different hats, as a operator of both toll roads and as the state's transit operator, my agencies don't actually operate these type of services. However, the members of the GRETA board also serve as what's known as the Governor's Development Council. And as that separate entity, it has a statewide purview to work with other agencies on coordinated efforts. So the purpose of the Governor's Development Council is to assist and advise the governor on the state's economic development and planning activities. And as I mentioned, this includes coordinating those efforts with other state agencies and performing tasks designed to address areas of importance to the state's overall economic success. It was because of this focus, the Governor's Development Council was asked to get involved with the state's rural and human services transportation network and the state's efforts in these areas. Rural and Human Services Transport, or RHST for short, provides services for transportation disadvantaged Georgians. This could be primarily seniors, persons of low income, persons with physical and or mental disabilities, as well as transportation services for any citizen residing in a county or region with a rural transit system. So you heard Seth talking about these 120 different operators. You'll hear more about that from our speakers today. This network of RHST is overseen by several state agencies, each with unique funding streams for specific customer needs. The presence of those multiple funding streams and the resulting potential for multiple networks to serve the same area is what led the General Assembly in 2010 to ask the Governor's Development Council, or tasked rather the Governor's Development Council with evaluating the extent to which these agencies coordinate their services and to report annually on opportunities to improve such coordination efforts. In 2015, the General Assembly removed the requirement for my agency and for the Governor's Development Council to produce annual reports. Therefore, the 2015 report was the last report that we produced. In order to provide a broader overview of the network, some of the key terminology in this area, and the results that were illustrated in our final report, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dave Castle, who served as the project manager for our RHST efforts and production of those annual reports. Then after Dave concludes, we have representatives from the 3 key state agencies involved in the state's rural and human services transportation efforts. We have Carol Comer from Georgia DOT, Leanne Trainer from Department of Human Services, and Mr. James People from Department of Community Health. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave.
All right, thank you, Chris, and members of the RDC, thank you so much for having me here. I was the project manager for the GDC, and again, we were asked to look at the systems that are effectively overseen by GDOT, DHS, and DCH in rural parts of the state. And what I'm trying to do is quickly explain to you clearly so you can understand it. A pot of money that has about $150 million comes from about 10 different funding streams that are federal, some of which are state, many of which have different eligibility requirements. It goes to 3 separate agencies available in 159 counties, except sometimes not. So I'm going to try to do that as clearly as I can, and if there's a reason why the legislature wanted us to look at coordination, perhaps that description is it. And see if we've got the presentation up here. Should be the second one from the bottom, I believe. So we reported out for about 5 different years, and once the, at some point you've reported out, and that's part of why the legislation stopped around 2015. So you'll see data points that stop in 2015 and FY14. But to explain what Chris said again, RHST is a way of referring to all of the different funds that are really available in rural parts of the state to transport people. And the key to understanding it, and particularly how to coordinate it, is to know that there are 3 main pieces. The first is the rural public transportation piece. Potentially anyone could take a ride on this system to potentially any eligible area within the service area. Oversight is done by GDOT, but this is the source of funding that has the broadest potential eligibility. The 2 other pieces, the HST pieces, are the transportation programs that are overseen by DHS. There are a number of these, 5 or 6 maybe different federal funding streams, possibly more. And you can only ride if you're eligible, and eligibility depends on the funding stream. Some funding streams are only meant for the elderly or the disabled. Some funding streams may have a trip end, such as work, that is the only thing it can be used for. Last, but as I'll show in a second, certainly not least, is what we call the NET. So this is the 3rd piece. This is the Medicaid, the transportation arm really of Medicaid. And it's actually the largest portion of funding that you'll see in rural areas to take people where they need to go. It also has the most specific eligibility. You have to meet income requirements to medical purposes. When we talk about coordination, what we're talking about is you've got 3 major pots of funding with different eligibility. If completely contracted independently, you could wind up with 3 networks in the same area. So what we meant by coordination was, can you get from 3 networks to 2 by putting trips on the same provider, or from 3 to 1? And many times we talk about using the rural public transportation provider, if the county has it, as the backbone, as that provider. And the question is, to coordinate, can you get DHS trips on the rural public transportation provider? Can you get the NET trips on that? That's the essence of coordination, trying to move away from 3 potentially different independently operating networks or providers towards 2 or 1. So why is coordination important? Why did the legislature ask us to use it? I don't think you have to see this slide well in detail to understand it. The lines represent different federal funding streams. There's a reason why there are multiple state agencies. This happens throughout states really all across the country. At the top you see the different federal funding agencies. I think the key to this slide is to recognize that those funding streams, the federal ones, have different reporting requirements, they have different eligibility, they have different audit requirements, and I think the thing it tells you is it's very difficult for one provider or one entity to be the expert that knows how to get every one of these different funding streams and their clients onto one network. It's possible, but challenging. Particularly challenging with the Medicaid piece of transportation, which is the most rigorous in terms of the forms and the various rules that it has to adhere to. So I want to give you an idea of the financial picture here. Again, there are 3 big pieces to rural and human services transportation. You'll see us use RPT, or rural public transportation, and GDOT synonymously. That's the rural public transportation piece. And what you see here are operational costs, what you pay for drivers, for fuel, for insurance. It's basically the cost it takes to physically perform the trip. And what you see in the dark shade of blue here are the federal funds. Pretty much every local or state dollar that is in RHST is leveraging a federal dollar. That's critical, because if we're going to meet the needs down the road as populations grow, the first question might be, will the federal dollars keep up? So you see the majority of the dollars are federal, and a couple other things that come out of this. If you look at the GDOT funding piece here, this is again the rural public transportation. Half of it's federal, half of it's actually local. And so you'll see a slide later on where you're going to notice that not every county has a rural public transportation system. You might wonder, why is that? They may not know about it, but more likely they decided not to put up the local dollars to match the federal dollars in that particular county. So rural public transportation is really a choice. It is not something you see everywhere in the state. But you will notice that of the 120 or so public transportation providers we have, there are actually about 115 or so counties out of 159 in Georgia that do have a rural public transportation system. Another piece that I think is important here is the size of that Medicaid program. We said it's the biggest part of transportation in rural areas of the state, and this shows that. Again, you can look at an operational cost as what it costs to actually run the trip. Medicaid is much larger than DHS and actually GDOT combined. There are a lot of trips happening in that Medicaid program. So when we talk about coordinating, in particular the Medicaid piece, that's a lot of trips to try to put on a rural public transportation system. And I think this graphic helps show that. The trips also go further, which is part of the reason why it tends to cost a little bit more. The total pot in FY14 was $146 million, but I think what's critical here is we tried to project needs out in 2030, and this was just a simple straight line projection, estimated a need for about $188 million. That's just to keep up with population growth. That's not to fill any gap that may exist today. That's a difference of $42 million. So as we did our work at the GDC, I don't know that the problem so much is coordination. The problem may be the $42 million and the need to transport those folks. And keep in mind, the real question is, at this point, will the federal dollars help keep up? And I think that $42 million in growth, what we might need by 2030, is also important when you think about what coordination could do. We were asked by the legislature to look at how coordination could increase efficiencies. We'll show you a slide in a moment that shows that if we coordinated more, which takes effort, we might be able to find a couple $1 million in efficiencies and a need that looks more like 42 million. I think that's a critical conclusion. So 5 years of reporting, 4 bullet points to describe some of the big takeaways. We don't know if RHST funding will keep pace with population growth. We mentioned that most of the funds are federal, local and state dollars are matching them. The key question, will federal funds keep up? Simply don't know. We were asked to look at whether coordination can increase effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and the answer that we came to was yes. We were able to get some data to show that. Again, if you had 3 independent networks in the same area, if you went to 2 or 1, in theory, you'd be more efficient. We had some data, put together some numbers that were able to show that. We talked about there being 3 main pots of money: rural public transportation and DHS. Coordinating those is much more feasible in the short term. DHS trips tend to be shorter than Medicaid. There are some that do stay within counties, for example, the senior centers. And you'll see on the next slide that there's been a lot of success already. Coordinating with Medicaid, getting the Medicaid trips, that big pot of money, onto the rural public transportation systems requires a lot more. Quite a bit of capital. You need a lot of vehicles for the rural public transportation provider to be big enough to take on those trips. But we also are honest to say that you would probably need legislation. There are a number of rural public transportation providers that understandably would be reluctant to take on something new, something so big, with the rigorous reporting that comes, but also potentially with liquidated damages. NET is the only of the 3 programs that assesses a liquidated damage in the event that you don't meet a performance standard. You're not on time, and therefore you miss your doctor's appointment. So there are some systems, rural public transportation systems, that are understandably a bit reluctant to take that on. So trying to coordinate NET is a much bigger bite at the apple. A good bit of those challenges in the bite at that apple is due to some of the federal requirements that come along with the program. I want to take a second to try to explain this map to you. The first thing we tried to figure out was how coordinated we were, and the second thing was what could we potentially get out of more coordination. And what you see up there in the map, the counties that are white are those that don't have rural public transportation. They may not be eligible, if you look at Fulton County, for example, or they may have chosen not to participate in the program. What we looked at is where there is a rural public transportation provider, are they coordinating with either DHS or NET or both? Meaning, is that rural public transportation provider taking trips from Leanne's program with DHS or NET trips that James will talk about? And what we found is that the vast majority of our rural public transportation operators are in fact coordinated. We estimated we get a little over $1 million in efficiencies every year due to the coordination we already have. The opportunity, though, is to try to get what I would say are the light blue counties to be either medium blue by taking one of those two agency strips, or dark blue, in which case we would call it fully coordinated, but you're taking trips from both DHS and from NET. And so if you look at this, I think part of why we said DHS is easier to coordinate, it's actually shown in the shades of medium blue. So again, light blue, you have a rural public transportation operator, they do not take DHS and NET trips. Potential opportunity there, particularly to coordinate the DHS trips on those systems. In the medium blue, you see a rural public transportation operator taking one of the two agencies' trips. And what's really profound here is that in almost every instance of a medium blue county, the trip that's being taken are the DHS trips. That's part of why we concluded it's more feasible to coordinate those. You can see it happening throughout the state more frequently. Simply put, it's logistically simpler. NET coordination does happen. There are a number of dark blue counties that happen. And if you wanted to say, well, what would we get out of it if we coordinated more? What would the juice be? If you were to take these light blue counties, 20 plus of which, and put DHS trips on them, about $100,000 in efficiencies. Remember, we talked earlier about the fact that the need in 2030 might be about 42 million. Coordination may not be the entire piece. If you did want to coordinate the Medicaid trips, you could get a lot more efficiencies, potentially. In theory, you could, about $1.5 million. But remember, you've got to invest in the capital. It may require legislation. And if the trips are contracted separately, there's no guarantee that each agency gets those savings. Remember, there are 3 different agencies involved. The key point to drive home is that coordination can create efficiencies, but to be reminded, especially with NET, there are substantial challenges in getting there. Oh, got a little fast there, I'm sorry. So back to the recommendations. We worked with our state partners. We also called every one of those RPT systems, the rural public transportation operators, and said, why don't you take DHS or NET Medicaid trips? And we put these into some very simple high-level recommendations. If you want to get more coordination, you'll need to start by providing the vehicles. That rural public transportation provider needs more vehicles to take more people where they need to go. But you also need expertise. Remember that these are different funding sources that DHS has. You'd have to teach that RPT provider how to do those. In terms of Medicaid, you need vehicles, but quite a few more. You would also need expertise, but quite a bit more. That is a much more rigorous and challenging program to try to administer. But you'd also want to evaluate liquidated damages. As I mentioned, NET is the one system that does assess liquidated damages. For example, if you're not on time, and we heard, understandably perhaps, from some rural public transportation operators, we don't particularly want to take a contract on if we could be assessed damages if we don't get them there right on time. And the last piece would be to encourage RPT systems to be regional in nature. Many rural public transportation systems are within a county, sponsored by a county. They can leave the county, but often want to stay within it. Remember, they're matching their local dollars for federal. A regional system would do a better job of accommodating an NET trip because these medical trips to hospitals oftentimes go so much further and go well beyond county boundaries. That's all that I have, and I don't know if we want to hold off on questions until the end or ask them now. Hold off until the end? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Powell, Chairman England, thank you for the opportunity, members of the council, to be here today to talk about rural public transportation from the department's perspective. And even though we're talking specifically about transit today, I always like to put forth that whether we're talking roads, rails, runways, or rivers, it takes a connected transportation network to move people and products efficiently and effectively. So transit is a single component of our state transportation network. Let's see what we got here. There we go. Obviously, public transportation matters. It provides access to jobs, to health care, to schools, and just improves quality of life. For the department, rural transit in our transit program is a single component of what our responsibilities are. We administer the FTA's program for state safety oversight for fixed guideway rail, which is for MARTA and the Atlanta streetcar. We participate with all the metro planning organizations for transit planning. We also partner with the rural commissions and provide transit planning dollars to them as well. We also provide state funding and federal funding assistance to our small urban systems, and our rural transit system is by far the largest. We have 81 counties and cities who are subrecipients, 81 subrecipients. There are multiple counties in some of the subrecipients, as we're able to partner with several regional commissions to actually deliver those public transit services. And we also, under our rural transit program, are required by law, by FTA, to fund an intercity bus program. And we are required to provide 15% of all of our federal funding to intercity bus providers to provide connectivity across the state. Right now, we partner with Greyhound Bus and with Southeastern Stages, and I think we have about 45 buses that we're helping provide that connectivity within the state. This right here, nothing tops the Dave's spaghetti funding slide that shows how complicated or diverse the funding is in Georgia. This right here represents all of the agencies in Georgia who are recipients of federal funding from the FTA. And under the department, we have our small urbans, our rural systems, MPOs, regional commissions. We have DHS is also a recipient, and Leanne will talk about that. And then we have our other large urban systems. But we certainly have to appreciate how much federal funding comes to Georgia through FTA for transit. Under our 5311 program, it's a formula program. We receive around $22 million annually. That provides capital and operating assistance and some planning assistance for all of our rural systems. It's about 12% of all the federal funding we receive here in the state. And as Dave alluded to earlier, the federal funding programs have, and what makes, I think, FTA's transit funding a little complicated for us, are the individual buckets in which the money comes in, and each bucket has its own requirements. So whether it's statewide and metropolitan planning dollars, urban dollars, rural dollars, there are nuances to each one of those buckets. The capital funding buckets that we have provide 80% federal funds. We at the department provide a 10% local match, or 10% non-federal match, and the locals provide 10% for all of our capital purchases. For operating assistance, the federal funding participation percentage is 50%, but the transit operator provides the other 50%. The funding in our state budget has not been sufficient to provide any assistance. And planning projects are split at 80% federal, 10% state, and 10% local. Here we go. Oops. And this slide right here, if you'll look down at the bottom, under our total of 81 rural systems, this was in federal fiscal year 15. And the FTA sponsors or has what is referred to as the National Transit Database, NTD data. And all of the recipients, whether you're a state government agency or a transit operator, if you receive federal funding, you must report annually into this system what your operating costs are, capital costs, fare box recovery, a tremendous amount of data. And so that's where these numbers came from. But for our rural systems in FY15, and it's pretty consistent or has been over the years, we had about 1.6 million riders. We had total cost to operate the rural system in Georgia was about $34 million. 19 of that was federally funded. For the state, we had $471,000 that we put into it. That's $472,000 of about $3 million in state funding that we receive at GDOT. Fare box recovery was about $1.4 million, which was about 4% of the cost to deliver those services. Much lower in the rural systems than it is for urban systems. They're usually a little over 30. And then local funds contributed another $12 million for a total of $34 million to operate rural public transit. And this map here depicts what I want you to focus on are the counties that have no color, that are white. We have 123 counties with public transit services. We have 36 counties that do not offer public transit. And in the state map, county map that Dave showed earlier when we talk about coordination, where we have white space on this map, and it's consistent with Dave's, those are areas where GDOT does not provide any funding, or there is not a locally operated public transit system. So coordination in those counties, GDOT is not a player. And as Dave alluded to, the department's rural public transit system really provides the backbone for the vehicles and the operations for the coordinated services. So we've got a pretty sizable gap that we need to fill with GDOT to make sure that all of our citizens have access to public transit. We're currently at the department in the process of kicking off a statewide transit plan, which will assess needs across the state and will develop recommendations, implementable recommendations on how to fill those gaps. And so that's one of the top priorities in our system, is to answer that question. Sorry, that slide looks a little strange, but again, number of counties that about 25% of the state doesn't have rural public transit, and it touches about 1 million citizens, which is about 10% of the population. In conversations that we've had with counties that don't offer public transit, there seems to be, in some cases, a perceived, there's not a perceived need. There is the absence of a sponsoring agency, someone to step forward and actually operate or sponsor a third party to provide those services in the county. A lot of counties have noted fiscal constraints. They don't feel that they have the physical or human resources to be able to operate these systems. And also, there's a perception, which part of it may be true, of the complexity of some of the federal requirements. And I think if there's one thing that we could ask for everyone for your help, is in Washington, D.C., to let our elected officials know that a lot of the constraints on the funding that we receive, we could benefit the citizens of our state by relaxing some of that and giving us more flexibility in trying to deliver these services. So anyway, our statewide transit plan will identify some strategies to try to fill in and color the map so that we do have coverage across the state. By the time we're done, I will figure this out. I have 3 slides here, and I'm not going to go over them in great detail, but they're just provided for your information. Again, we've used data from the FTA's National Transit Database and also the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, of which the department is a member. We provide data along with our other state partners across the country on our funding and transit system data. So we've listed both of those, but you can see for Georgia, for the department, we put about $3 million of state funds we received through appropriations into our statewide transit systems. The Greta received about $11 million in fiscal year 15 to help with their express bus service. And that equates to a per capita spending of about $1.42 here in Georgia. It's interesting to note that Georgia, we have 113 rural and small urban systems, one of the largest numbers in the country. So we say grace over an awful lot of systems. I'm going to skip to the end, and I'll give you a roll-up of some of these numbers. Oops. If you'll see down at the bottom, the average state funding was around $48 million, just out of a number. I think there's, let's see, I think there's 27 states in this list. Average number of systems for all those states was about 55 compared to Georgia's 113, and the average per capita spending for transit was $7.16. And it's interesting to note funding for transit programs across the country are varied. Obviously, funding for states that is strictly received from state general fund appropriations tend to be some of the lowest that you'll see on those lists. Other states have, dedicated trust funds and transportation funds. As I mentioned earlier, we have a role in statewide transit planning and regional transit planning. We partner with our regional commissions to assist them in assessing needs in their area and, working to find ways to, again, help increase the coverage that we have. 3 of our regional commissions, 3 Rivers, Southwest Georgia, and Coastal Regional Commission, all 3 of those actually sponsor and are subrecipients from GDOT and operate the transit systems in their area. We have found that there's tremendous efficiencies to be derived from working on a regional basis, their economy of scale. And I think you'll hear regionalism mentioned many times today, and we're certainly looking to analyze the data that we have a little further and hopefully take that data to help make and prioritize some investment decisions. Just to give you a little perspective nationally, where rural transit in Georgia, how we compare from a national average. Number of trips per mile in Georgia is about 10%. National average is about 16%. Operating cost per passenger trip in Georgia were around in FY16 about $16, $17 per trip. National average was $18.75. And operating cost per mile, we were at $1.75 for our rural system, and the national average is about $3. So Even though I think you can see that we don't have a lot, but what we do have, we're stretching some efficiencies and working cost effectively. Oops. And this right here is just a slide to depict, back from, I think, like 1997 through today, sort of the ups and downs in our state transit funding appropriations. Right now, in the last several years, since 2011, we have been approximately $3 million that we're using to match our federal dollars. We will be very appreciative to recognize that in FY15, there was a $75 million GO Transit bond program appropriation, which paid tremendous dividends to a number of our systems across the state, but they were mostly urban systems. The constraints on using bond dollars really limited options to help our rural systems. And when you look at the challenges and opportunities moving forward, I think everyone recognizes the population growth that is forecasted. Also, the University of Georgia conducted a study several years ago. Our aging population, which they refer to as the silver tsunami, which is coming, our population is expected to grow, senior population like 176%. Over the next 30 years. And we also, as the clock ticks by, we've got to learn to use technology more efficiently to help us in delivering public transit. We've got to look for new partners and new ways, look further into the private sector, look at private not-for-profits, and different ways to help us be more efficient in delivering the services, but finding, other options. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Leanne and look forward to your questions.
I know that y'all have the presentations that y'all have presented. We're going to put them on the website. But what I'd really like to do is proceed to the roundtable discussion at this point in time. I'm sorry you got dinged.
No problem.
All right, we've got, what we want to do is to have y'all discuss the questions that are on the agenda. And I'll read them and y'all just chime in and contribute a little bit. And Leanne and James, since y'all did not get the opportunity to present, I'm going to let y'all start off on the discussion on the questions, but what we're interested in is what can the state do to bridge the gap between communities that have job opportunities and individuals who are willing and able to work but do not have the economic means to get to work. Second question is, how can a transit network be configured to help support access to health care for low-income Georgians? And best practices or innovations in other states that y'all have seen, whether it be industry, van pools, wheels to work. In rural Georgia, a lot of people, we don't have access to good quality transit. We have these the programs that y'all have alluded to, but as far as having a route and I can go out to the bus stop and I can use my token or get on the MARTA, I don't have that in rural Georgia. So most people use their cars, but there are people who do not have cars, who want jobs, who can get jobs, who qualify for jobs and can pass the drug test but can't get to work. And then there are other people who may not be on Medicaid but who do not have a car and need to make medical appointments. So what do we do in rural Georgia? We've even talked about, why do we not partner with rideshare networks and then just do some kind of voucher system or something like that? So if y'all could just sort of brainstorm with us what we can do to deal with the transportation issue for people who want jobs, people who may need to shop and get groceries, and people who need to get to health care.
Well, I agree with the voucher program approach, and that's actually one of the items we're exploring within the Department of Human Services, especially in rural areas. Issue vouchers for consumer use for areas where either funding is an issue or providers are an issue. You know, there are areas of Georgia where, as Carol mentioned, there are no rural public transit providers, and that is a real challenge. So issuing vouchers, using volunteer programs, being creative in how to actually meet the need, and then having someone identified to coordinate all of that is the real issue when you have a voucher program or a volunteer program. Who monitors it, who pays it, who does the day-to-day administrative work on that. Those are some of the things we're exploring within DHS to implement on a small scale to meet some of those needs.
I'll just kind of say, from our perspective at DCH and Medicaid and non-emergency medical transportation, in terms of looking at the questions, we see a lot of need for more drivers in rural areas. We see a lot of need for more providers in rural areas, whether that be a healthcare provider or specifically for our purposes, transportation providers. The way NEMT works is DCH contracts with two brokers, Southeast Trans and Logisticare. I'm sure you guys have heard of those. And then they contract with transit providers. And those transit providers can be anybody as large as a company that may have 5 to 10 vans. They may have wheelchair vans, stretcher vans, and so forth. Or it may be a mom and pop operation that may only have a couple of vans. Having said that, though, the need the demand is greater than our capability at this point. So we see an opportunity if we could put more trips, more Medicaid trips on the 5311s, on the DOT service, that would help us out. And if we could work with our partners to try to increase the capacity in rural Georgia, that'll help, because there's a huge need for us to add to our provider network, if you will, our transit provider network. Part of our challenge is not unlike your challenges here. If you think about it, drivers, well, there's pretty strict backgrounds checks you got to go through to be a driver for us. And a lot of times people can't meet the requirements because of whatever reason. Then there's an insurance requirement component to this that is also, in some ways, it hinders some people who may want to get into the business because the insurance requirements are pretty stringent and they are pretty, expansive. And if you can imagine, because we're talking about medical trips, we're talking about people who generally are aged or seniors. They may have medical fragility. They may not be as mobile. And so when you're transporting that population, the requirements, the challenges tend to be somewhat critical. And so, but those are some things that we think we have an opportunity, if we can kind of work with you guys or work together to figure out how can we increase our capacity in these rural communities to make sure that our Medicaid members get to their medical appointments and get there on time.
Ed?
I get a little mixed message here sometimes, because we may not be able to get drivers and all this, but we're looking to expand it in areas where there's not enough local buy-in. And to me, that seems like a little contradiction. I want to go to the vouchers and the providers that you're talking about, because the RDC does run it in Southwest Georgia. Have you done any studies at all? I get the medical piece. I'm trying to keep that separate. That's a separate issue. Have you done any studies at all that look at your success for the rides in the areas where you do have the local buy-in versus the unemployment or employment rate? Because you're covered in the 9th Forest Congressional District by your RDC, but people still can't get to work. It's not a matter of not having providers in that area. You're doing the providing. So if you connect those dots for me, why do you have unemployment if you have the providers?
Well, I guess from our perspective, we don't have enough providers in some of our rural counties for the reasons I mentioned.
Let me interrupt. If someone wants a job in Webster County, do y'all have a plan in place that allows them to have a way to get to work? Maybe that's what we're asking at the end of the day. Not about a trip to the doctor through logistic care, but do you have a program in these counties that are green in rural Georgia, not Express, not Peach Pass, in rural Georgia, if someone needs to get a job, has a job, got an offer at the prison, do you have a way to get them to work?
Yes, sir. In the counties that offer rural public transit through our GDOT program, an individual just needs to call and request the trip, and transportation is available.
Do you have that broken down by riderships for jobs?
Actually,
I'd love to get that information to see where we're underserved, Mr. Chairman.
That we don't, I mean, we don't have that, but that's certainly something that we can look at as part of our statewide transit plan, is try to assess. But I think in adding to answer to your question, I think one of the things that we need to do a better job of is educating the citizens in counties that have public transit where that it is available and how to access it and take advantage of it.
But I'd love for y'all to keep that data where we actually know you're picking people up and taking them to work, because you don't know if you're underserved or not if we're not keeping that data. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Carroll's too, same map slide. Yours had the light blue counties. And I want to give you a kind of specific thing that I've been trying to deal with and help somebody through DHS and all of them. There's a home in one of the light blue counties where several people live. One guy's on the SSI. He gets transportation to Advantage health care. Another guy's on Social Security disability who does not get that transportation. And there's some little glitch in between the two that on the provider, but the van comes 3 times a week and picks up one guy, but the other guy can't get a ride to the same place. He's coming from the same home, going to the same place, but the other guy can't get it and the other one does. And I gotta think that the guy that can't get it, when he has periodic inpatient health care somewhere, it's gotta cost less just to give him a ride, since it's already there picking up somebody else, than it does to put him in the hospital somewhere and take care of him. That's the kind of stuff that when you get out in rural areas, it don't make a whole lot of sense just because there's a difference between a SSI and a SSD. You follow what I'm trying to say?
I think a little bit of what you're getting at is the spaghetti slide that we showed, and that when you've got folks that have different eligibility, it's possible that the provider for one of those eligibilities is either different, or that there may not be a rural public transportation system with the broadest eligibility to do it. It does certainly happen. You're getting at different levels of eligibility, and you think, why can't we take everyone? If you've only got a service that's providing transportation for one eligible group, and if particularly you don't have that rural public transportation system there too, which is what that frankly sounds like, you may only be able to take one person. I think that's where trying to coordinate efforts where possible, where one provider could take larger numbers of eligible populations does start to make some sense.
Well, and that's what I'm talking about, coordinate, and it's a van, it ain't a Pinto. It's, going from the same home to the same provider.
And that's one where you also get the efficiency too, that it just so happens those two folks are in the same home. You don't have to go to the other side of the county to get that other person. That's one where you could efficiently, if coordinated, transport multiple people. Everybody would win in that event.
But there's some little glitch in the rules that
Yep.
one guy's eligible and the other guy's not, and it doesn't make sense.
Can't say that I know the glitch for sure, but I would say it almost sounds like there's not a rural public transportation provider, because if there were, potentially, that rural public transportation provider could pick up that second person who isn't meeting that other eligibility.
And it is in a likely county.
Okay, okay. That sounds more interesting still.
Yeah.
Mac Jackson.
Ms. Coleman, you talked about 36 counties that do not offer public transit, and I probably serve in that district. I've got Hancock County, Washington County, counties like that. But you also talked about you're working on identifying strategies to reduce those unserved counties. Is there any way you can keep us abreast as you work on those strategies so that we can inform our people, our citizens, that that is being done and what's coming along with that?
Absolutely, and as we'll have several meetings around the state, and we will certainly make sure that all of our state representatives are included, notifications so that you can attend. Absolutely, we appreciate the input.
Corbett.
My question is for Ms. Coomer as well, and I'd like to expand on what Representative Jackson was talking about, the counties in white. I represent a few of those as well. Your last slide, you had on there future opportunities, I guess, private, not-for-profit. Could you expand on what that would look like?
There's certainly, I mean, we've all talked about, needing transportation providers, and in many cases, our county governments that have transit systems will contract those out to third parties. And 99% of the time, they're for-profit companies, but previously in Georgia, we had not provided eligibility for private not-for-profit companies, and so we've expanded that. They're certainly welcome to apply. They just have to meet all of the FTA criteria. So we're looking again to find ways to include more people in these opportunities.
Darlene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Darlene Taylor from Thomas County, and I'm in Region 10. And all three of my counties have told me they have different sets of rules that they go by. In Thomas County, you can call, set an appointment, and someone will pick you up. Grady County has told me it doesn't work the same way. Are all of the regions supposed to be working the same way within each county of the region? How does that work?
Yes, if they're funded under our Rural 5311 program, they should all work the same way. There should be a demand response. They should call, request the trip.
Are there any that have routes, or do you have to do the call the day before, the week before? Haven't we set up any where you can get a ride from Meigs to Thomasville or from Cairo to Thomasville?
They are under the rural transportation system that the department funds. They are demand response trips. They're not fixed routes like you would have like in an urban system.
That's the only way it can work is on demand. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would there be any way to use something like your EBT card if a transport type of EBT card where someone that needed the transportation doesn't have the money, whether it be one that's funded some way, but it would give them a way to get to and from work? Even, I'm just looking for a way, because we do have people, even if they called from one county to another, would there be some way to have something like that work where they don't have $1 every day or $2 or whatever, where they could get the pass or the card and it could be accumulated that way?
That's certainly, it's not something that's common. It's certainly something that we could look into for different ways.
You also
to
talked
pay.
about a tax credit. That could be something an employer could help them purchase if they needed to, but some way, not give them cash per se, but could give them the card or help them refill it, much like you have your Peach Pass, something like that. It might be something that would be operational. Again, wouldn't it be worth it to look at? Is it something the federal government withholds dollars if you have routes instead of per call? Why is it set up that way?
As we mentioned earlier, I think all of us agree, doesn't matter which federal program you're funded under, they are very prescriptive in the requirements. And so that is a requirement for the rural funding, is that it be demand response. It's not a fixed route system. Funding for those programs comes out of another pot with another set of
Yeah, so somebody that
requirements.
wanted to use it for work transportation has to call every day and say, I need a ride tomorrow.
Correct.
Pick me up at 7, and then pick me up at the plant.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
In certain cases that our red tape sometimes gets in the way of good old common sense. If the old boy's going to the same place, I don't know, but it's some restrictions in the funding, I'm sure. And representing, and many of us around this table represent white counties and down that map. I know I've got several as well. And it's not that they're not concerned about our citizens. Some of our counties are, quite frankly, concerned about making payroll next month. And taking another project on is not economically feasible. Some of these are really struggling with their current fiscal restraints. And I know one of the barriers to entry with providing some of this care would be and I'm not sure, the liquidated damages to the NET. So tell me if I'm wrong, that transportation provided for a doctor's appointment, and you get behind this time of year in a rural part of the state, you'll get behind like I did this morning, equipment going down the road, and you are late to a doctor's appointment. Is it my understanding that we're providing the transportation and then also taking on a liability of, if you miss that doctor's appointment, then somebody pays somebody something?
Yes, Representative. So the liquidated damages process is one that we spend a great deal of time on in terms of trying to figure out when to assess liquidated damages. So the process, there's going to be traffic, there's going to be accidents, and you can do everything, the provider can do everything they're supposed to do, but if there's a wreck on I-20 or I-75 and that member doesn't get to their appointment, they could be held accountable for a liquidated damage. We try not to assess liquidated damages to the point where we put providers out of business, if you will. But we do have to make sure that our members, because these are medical appointments, get to their appointments on time. A dialysis patient can't be too late for their appointment or they'll be in the hospital. So we have to toe that line, and we try to be fair. During Hurricane Irma, we had a lot of missed appointments because of the situation, and we didn't assess liquidated damages, obviously, because of that. So we try to be judicious in the way we do it and the way we assess it. But when we have like a habitual performer, we will assess a damage to the broker, and oftentimes that broker will pass that assessment down to that provider. If it's someone that's always late, or someone that's always having accidents, or someone that's always making members miss their appointments, we try to get that provider to improve their service.
There's only 2 brokers in the state.
Yes, sir. Currently, yes, sir.
Is there anything that keeps us from having more brokers to get more competition,
well,
rather than assessing damages?
Well, the way it works for us is we every 6 years we have a competitive procurement that we issue, and we're actually in the process of getting ready to issue the procurement for the next 6 years, which will start July 1 of 2018. We anticipate that RFP, the request for proposals, to post before the end of this year. And at that time, people who are interested in becoming a broker will have the opportunity to apply to DCH and DOS to become a broker in Georgia. So they'll be competing against the assumed Logisticare and Southeast Trans for this business. And our regions are a little bit different than the state service delivery regions. We've got 5 regions instead of, I think it's 12, but our regions are established based on healthcare transport patterns. So it's a little different, but whoever applies will have to identify which region they want to be a broker in. And if they're successful with their proposal and their cost proposal, then they may get awarded the contract. And it could be more than 2 brokers after the procurement goes through the process. But it's all competitive and it's all based on that procurement.
We have time for one more question other than mine. Bill Werkheiser.
Thank you. And this is for Carol. Carol, good to see you again. On the funding part of it, especially for the locals systems, the 80-10-10 on capital outlay. If a local system is willing to jump through the hoops, because that's a pretty attractive draw. If they're willing to go through the hoops and get the application in, is it competitive to get it? Are they going to pretty much get it? Is the money from the state and federal money there?
Currently today, yes. As we start to add additional counties, those dollars become stretched. But today,
but right now, if they're willing to go through the system,
sufficient.
they're pretty much going to get it. Okay, that's
Correct.
good to hear. Thank you, Chairman.
Let me ask you one question. If you've looked at what other states are doing, is there one thing that stands out that has been done in another state to enhance the transportation network in rural areas that could be replicated in the state of Georgia? Terry did a little Google search while y'all have been talking, and he said that there are states that use EBT cards or allow EBT cards to be used for transportation. So that is a possibility. Can you think of some other things that maybe you've seen in other states that could be replicated in Georgia?
I mean, to specifically address, expanded service or gaps in service, unfortunately, we don't know of a silver bullet or, any global type changes that we could make that would make a difference very quickly.
I do think one county from kind of the coordination perspective that stands out that might prevent the representative's questions over here about coming to a county and you can only pick one of the 2 people up in the House is North Carolina, which has a very coordinated system statewide, but they've worked at it going back to the 70s and done it through a series of executive orders. It didn't come quickly, but they also put the money into having the capital, so the rural public transportation was big enough, that system was. And they also had an executive order years back to coordinate at least the DHS transportation, basically what they would call that. So there are examples of states that do coordinate, but they did a little of what we talked about in the recommendations from the GDC's report. Capital funds to have enough vehicles to coordinate it, and you may need to either encourage, in North Carolina's case, I'm not advocating this, they did mandate some coordination going back many years ago.
Thank y'all very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break. All right, let's get started. If everybody will take your seat, let's get started.
We are. It's not a lot. It's not enough.
Are we already doing that?
We're already doing that.
Don't tell Teresa because she thinks we're not.
Okay. It's not.
I know it's like I'm right at $8 million. No, not even, about 7 3/4, 7.5, something like that.
That's the bond doll. Oh, you're talking about, I'm sorry, you're talking about
The lease.
The W&A lease. That
Yeah.
doesn't come to us. That stays at state properties. It needs to come to us.
We're going to. We're going to. Okay. Everybody take a seat. We're going to do a round table from the get-go on this one. And I think everyone's going to be pretty interested in what you're going to be hearing and what we're going to be talking about. All right, everybody in the back of the church back there, come on to the front. About to have an altar call. So this afternoon, we have several individuals that are going to be talking to us about rail and rail freight and all the things that go into that in our state. And we have Nancy Cobb, who's Assistant Division Director for Intermodal, Aviation, Rail, Transit, Waterways, all those things. We also have with us Craig Camuso with CSX, Connor Poe with Norfolk Southern, Mark Middleton with the Railroad Association, and then Joe Arbana with Genesee and Wyoming. And want them to kind of discuss just a little bit about what are kind of the barriers in place for rail. As we had the discussion early on, as Lee had mentioned at the ports, the issues of increasing number of containers coming into the Savannah port and other things coming into Brunswick as well. But what are some of the impediments and barriers to job growth and economic development as it relates to rail, and some of the things that we possibly could do to make y'all's life a little bit easier, get a few trucks off the road, and make things flow a little bit better in our state. So, Miss Nancy, you have the microphone. All right.
The state owns 535 miles of short line railroad. 490 miles of that are under lease with 6 short line operators that are located throughout the state. Those short line operators are located in northwest Georgia, middle Georgia, southwest Georgia, and then the bottom part of Georgia. For the last 4 years, we have requested somewhere averaging around 25 to 30 million in our priority listing of projects on behalf of the department. Now, these are identifying what we call the worst of the worst in terms of need to repair rail so that our short lines can really operate as short lines. The definition of a short line is to run at 25 miles an hour and handle freight at 286,000 pounds. Currently, I don't believe any of our short lines are able to operate at 25. Most are operating at 5 and 10 miles an hour due to the poor track conditions, and none of them are able to handle 286,000 pounds. So in order for the state's short line railroads to do what they can do for rural Georgia in terms of job creation, job retention, for instance, up in the northwest corner, that CCKY is the name of that line, Chattanooga and Chickamauga and Chattanooga, 49 miles, supports over 4,000 jobs. The Heart of Georgia line straight through central Georgia, starting at the Alabama line and going almost to the East Coast, supports over 1,000 jobs. But what's important about the Heart of Georgia, it is truly in the heart of rural Georgia. And those companies are anywhere from 5, 10 jobs, 15 jobs, 50 jobs, 100 jobs, 200 jobs. Those jobs are critical to those areas of rural Georgia. They're connectors. Those short lines are first mile and last mile connectors to the Class 1 railroads, those guys sitting up here on the table with me, to the port, and to the global marketplace. So they are the connectors and the critical links to supporting job creation in rural Georgia. So what I would say to you in terms of the impediment is funding. Our state rail plan that was referenced in 2015 said that we needed $42 million a year to maintain our short lines. We're receiving somewhere around 25% of that. So funding is a critical component for us to be able to leverage the short lines for the state. The state owns the track.
If I may, Nancy, Chairman, my name is Joe Arbona, and I represent some of the short-line railroads here in the state. Some of them are actually privately owned. And I was going to point to the map above. You will see that there are two main colors on the map. I mean, that's a whole rail network for Georgia. But the railroads that you see in red are privately owned short lines that serve the rural areas of the state. The yellow ones, as Nancy mentioned, are the publicly owned, the state-owned short lines that are also operated by private railroads that have an agreement with the state. But as you will see, there's both kinds up there in the map. And as Nancy mentioned, we are the first and last mile of delivery. We connect rural Georgia because we are rural Georgia. We're all in all the small towns. And we connect all those rural businesses to the large railroads that actually are, you might compare it to the interstate highway system. We're the county roads that connect those businesses to the interstate highway system that can take the goods all the way out to other major cities, to other countries, because some of these railroads connect with railroads in Canada, down in Mexico, or to ports that will take things internationally. So to answer your question, there are several privately owned railroads.
So when we're talking about the funding that you were talking about, Nancy, that where we're only funding 25% of the need, is that to maintain the state short lines, or is that to maintain all of the short lines?
Yes, sir, that is to maintain the state short lines.
And what percentage of all the short lines is the state?
I think mile-wise is probably about 50% of the short lines are state-owned, and the other 50% is privately owned.
So extrapolating from what you said, 40 million, Nancy, so we're talking 80 million to maintain all of it?
I think the issue with some of the condition we're talking about in this, I think in the numbers that are in the state rail plan do focus on some state-owned lines, but there's also a great deal of need where the lines are operable, but not at the maximum capacity to allow customers to maximize what they can carry. For example, we have a customer right now in Riceboro that for many years couldn't handle, couldn't put as much of their material on the rail cars because the rail line couldn't handle 286,000 pound rail cars. They could only do $263,000. These folks, S&F Chemicals, was basically operating with one arm tied behind their back because the rail lines were operating very slow and couldn't do the bridges couldn't handle that weight. So what they ended up doing is working with us, they ended up improving the lines, and now they're expanding, they're hiring people, and that's because the private sector had to step up to do something. Not every private industry can do that, Chairman, so in many cases, we're having to do it very slowly, and it's not quickly enough for our customers and for the businesses that need that competitive edge right now or yesterday to compete in the global economy. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, while you were talking funding, I wanted to answer that question.
Another component, and then I'm going to be quiet, is without a dependable funding stream from the state, we're unable to participate in any federal funding opportunities that might come our way from the Federal Rail Administration. They always require at least a 20% local match, and to be competitive, they're looking for more than 20% local match, and local match in this case would be the state. So without a dependable funding stream, we really are not able to take advantage of any of those opportunities. There's a couple I know that are coming up. Chrissy is going to be a new FRA funding stream that is dedicated and focused on short lines, but our ability to participate in that is very challenging without having a committed funding stream that we can use as leverage.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm Craig Camuso with CSX Transportation, and really just want to support what Joe and Nancy have talked about. As Joe mentioned, we're like these lines are lines that in most cases were former CSX or Norfolk Southern lines, that we couldn't make profitable. We couldn't support it because of the cost of the investment that has to go into these. So over the years, they've been short-lined, and companies like G&W and others that Nancy mentioned are able to keep these lines running and prosper, and they've been doing very well serving these communities, but they do need funding for them would help. I'd also like to add from a private standpoint, the railroad industry is the most capital-intensive industry in the nation. We put about 18 cents out of every dollar we make goes directly back into our infrastructure. CSX, Norfolk Southern combined spend about $250 million a year just to keep the railroads running in Georgia. So a lot of money is required just to keep the roads running. Short lines, not quite in the position, the budgets that the Class 1s have, so the funding becomes even more important. I can tell you a few years ago, I think it was on the Heart of Georgia line, the bridge that was going to go out to a plant that was literally about to shut down. And were it not for the General Assembly stepping in and helping with that bridge funding, you had a major plant with operated several hundred jobs would have been gone. So it's becoming a greater challenge every year for those railroads to stay afloat. And of course, those feed in and they assist us as well.
Chairman, if I may add to that point, we have actually some very strategic lines that are privately owned. That because of all the deferred maintenance over many years, and to Craig's point, I mean, the Class 1 railroads, the large railroads, we're trying to make them work as best as they could, try to keep them open as long as they could, but eventually they just couldn't get those margins where they needed to be. They were just too small. We've been able to keep expenses low. We've been able to go knocking door to door saying, hey folks, would you consider rail service instead of trucking? And many will say yes. And these are businesses that will do like 1 or 2 boxcars a week of stuff. I mean, they're not the unit trains of 200 containers, but those are the guys who actually need that kind of margin to be able to compete. And we can do that for them out in the rural areas, but it's going to take time. And I think that's where the issue of what Nancy was talking about, if there was a funding stream, something to help bring these lines up to where they need to be sooner rather than later, will give those rural areas that competitive edge. To give you an example, Nancy talked about the Chattooga and Chickamauga Railroad up in Walker County in northwest Georgia. Here's a railroad that's serving the new audio plant. Now, you're going to tell me that anybody going to look for a location for a plant in a rural area of the state is going to say, I'm going to bring this plant without any rail service? They need rail service the way they need roads and they need highways. And so for them to make a decision like that, they want a rail line that can provide the capacity, the security and the safety that's needed. Now, I'll say for my company, we're very proud to be the safest railroad company in the country and probably in the world. But I'm going to tell you, it's because we have, in many cases, to operate very slowly and with reduced capacity on weight, and that hurts business. And that's what we're here to tell you. Rural Georgia needs these railroads to be where they need to be competitive.
Clay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's in this committee that represents a lot of the rural parts of the state. In a meeting I was at last year or the year before, one of our short line railroads, I believe it's the Heart of Georgia that you were talking about, the hog line, actually has parts. It's not just not being able to load the cars to the maximum 286,000 pounds, but it's also deficiencies going from one area to the other. And it's not just the 5 and 10 miles an hour, but there's actually spots on the line that are stop and flag and I asked, what the heck does that mean? And they literally stop the train and keep traffic from coming across and then proceed on the line. And I agree that is an issue that would certainly help some of the rural parts of the state.
The Heart of Georgia line also, it is the longest line that we have traversing.
And state-owned.
Yes, it's state-owned. And there are over 100 bridges on this line. Most of those are timber bridges. And a number of those bridges, the structural integrity of those bridges is something that we are concerned about. And we have requested funding to shore up those bridges, and some we've done what we could with what we have, but just to put that on your radar screen within our particularly the Heart of Georgia line, that those bridges across those rivers and creeks are a significant concern as well.
If I may add to that too, the Heart of Georgia it's a wonderful railroad. I mean, it's a great look. It is the heart of Georgia, heart of rural Georgia. And that particular line connects with a privately owned railroad called the Georgia Central that goes into the Port of Savannah all the way up to Macon. And it's also a strategic line that could really serve the rural areas of the state very well. It cannot handle 286,000-pound cars either. So you've got two very valuable lines to the state that will eventually become 286, but not quickly enough for the customers and the potential customers who want to site on those lines and say, hey, here's a great location for us in a rural part of the state where we can create jobs. But without 286, without that reliable high capacity, what are we going to do? We're going to have to go look someplace else. And it's a challenge. And I tell you, I used to serve the western states at another railroad, and I love Georgia. What you all have done here, it's amazing to me. The business-friendly environment is fantastic. The way the rural parts of the state stand up and say, we're here to help you, has been fantastic. And some of the western states that we used to serve in my previous job, they didn't want us anywhere around, and it was very short-sighted, and they're paying for it in some ways. But I want you all to know that we are committed to bringing those lines up. It's just going to take a long time. With that kind of infusion of funding, we could do it a lot quicker and be more competitive as soon as possible.
You've given some examples of what has happened when you've upgraded these roads so that it's more economical to ship by rail than perhaps by truck. Do you have any data as far as projecting that if I spent this amount of money upgrading this line, that there is the demand for these jobs, this increased freight capacity, not just saying, gosh, we invested this and look what happened. Do you have any data that shows if we invested this much, we've got these people who already say that they will expand or that they will invest further in their communities?
Right now, we actually are in a situation in a couple of communities where, fortunately manufacturing is coming back and people are starting to expand. And with that, we're able to put infrastructure into those areas, and some of those include facilities in Fitzgerald and Blackshear and Thomasville right now from a CSX standpoint. And it's been good. It takes on the Class 1 part, there's a part that we pay to go into that. So we are seeing that as these facilities expand, we're able to expand with them. So that has been good.
Chairman, if I may add too, I know a project that I'm working on. I won't mention the state because it's a competitive state, but this particular project is in a state that does not support rail lines, and we have been trying to get a federal grant to help bring those bridges, it's about 114 of them, up to that 286 weight capacity. And we have customers who have written down, we're going to add jobs, we're going to do expansion. All this is already down in the books because they know they can make that happen if they have that kind of weight capacity. And a lot of it is just to also be able to connect with the CSX and the NS and be able to do it at the maximum level that they can handle. And so I know that I have some customers who will say, yes, we will do that. Can I say that for the whole industry? Well, there's 500 or 600 short lines. It's kind of hard to say.
But if I may stop you there, it would be helpful because it certainly is an easier sell if you can show a return on investment. So if y'all could start working on that and get us some data, I think that would help us.
Okay. I was just going to add that each year, each of our 6 operators are required to file an annual report with the department. That annual report includes carloads, employment data, company served, types of carloads, et cetera. And without exception, I believe that all 6 of our operators had made comments within their reports contingent upon improvements to the railroad. XYZ is planning to do ABC. So we have some of that data that we can share with you, and in some cases where we have been able to make strategic rail improvements along short portions of the rail corridor, that were critical to the delivery for certain companies, we've seen those kind of increases. So yes, we have some of that data that we can provide to you. Not as much as we probably would like to have, but we do have some we can share with you.
Joe and Mark, I guess, on this question. Joe from a company standpoint and Mark from an association standpoint, representing all the short lines and all the railroads in the state. Do y'all do private investment in the state-owned lines? And I'm asking this out of ignorance because I do not know. To what measure, and if the state were to come in and say, okay, we'll put this pot of money in, would you be willing to then at that point add some additional company funds, or if Mark, if you think other short lines would be willing to as well?
Well, thank you, Mark. Mr. Chairman, we do invest in all our lines, including the ones that are state-owned. The issue for us is that we have to do it, all our lines have to be self-sufficient. We don't take from a line in the north part of the state to get to a line in the southern part of the state. It just doesn't work. They have to be self-sufficient. So we have to go and work those customers. The average short line has about 15 customers nationwide. I have lines that have 3 or 4 or 5 customers. One anchor customer that kind of keeps the lights on, but then those little ones that I mentioned that have 2 or 3 rail cars that move, those are the guys who actually make our profit margins, even though they're small. So we got to take the profit and reinvest into our short lines, and we have to do that as best as we can.
Well, and I'm talking probably more along the actual infrastructure, not just locomotives and rolling stock, but whether it's rail, switches,
that's right.
ties, or whatever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yes, we do reinvest.
Okay.
I mean, but quite frankly, we do get a great deal of support from the state in being able to keep those lines slowly but surely better and better. And of course, you have to understand this is a concession. I mean, we have an agreement, but tomorrow it could be a different operator. So, but our commitment is to grow those lines. I mean, we don't just get them and, they're immediately profitable. We go knocking door to door to get more business. And please keep in mind that if we can't keep these lines open, because maybe we lose a customer who's saying, look, I got to have 286,000 pound maximum, or I can't have my goods going from point A to point B at 10 miles an hour. I mean, because there's a timeliness to this. If one of those small customers or 2 of them leave and they go and use trucks, not only are you going to have more congested roads that are supported primarily by taxpayers, but also you're going to have those short lines have to abandon the corridors. You do not want that for rural Georgia. And this is unfortunately something that does happen. They'll go from rails to trails. You've heard that comment. And then what happens is you'll never be able to bring that corridor back. And then if you...
The state bought the short lines to begin with.
That's exactly right. And the state was very, I mean, I commend the state for having that kind of foresight to think, hey, we do not want those corridors to disappear, because then rural Georgia will not have that criteria for those great locations along those rural areas to say, here's a great location for a plant, for job creation. And that's our commitment, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, what Joe was saying.
I think your Honor, he just has to turn it up when you start talking.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what Joe was saying is exactly what I'm hearing from the other members. They look at their investment because all these funds are private investment funds, they're looking at it from a return on investment standpoint. So whether they're one of the companies that you see on the map that is online that they own, they're looking at whether or not there's a return on investment in regard to a specific project that's presented to them on their private line, or whether or not you're looking at an investment that they would make in some sort of public-private partnership arrangement on something where they're a leasee. And so their lessor-lessee relationship between the state and one of our members is not unlike any other landlord-tenant relationship, whether it's a building or anything else. I mean, you want, if there's value there, it creates more value for the in our case, the tenant and the lessee. And so that's very important. And so as we look at not only a large short line like Heart of Georgia, but some of these smaller ones like Joe mentioned. I mean, I'm thinking about like Georgia Woodlands up in the Washington, Georgia area. They have 16 miles of rail. They take in less than $1 million per year and move about 558 loads per year. And so you think, well, why are they important? Well, in that little corner of the state, there are some businesses that exist and are able to exist and do business there because they have that relationship with the railroad. And so, you know, as folks have brought these big micro problems and mega trends to you today, and I think we're all getting a better sense of you know, freight rail being part of the overall network you all are trying to create. You know, we're looking at it very much in a micro sense. We're trying to figure out what can we do to improve the odds that the Georgia Woodlands Railroad in Washington, who takes in less than $1 million a year, can make an investment where there's a reasonable return in the private market for them to continue to grow and serve businesses in that area and get to the fundamental problem that you all have been talking about the last several months, which is economic development in Georgia.
If I may also add, there are a lot of short line railroads that can't have a representative here talking about how important they are because they're running the trains. I mean, the mom and pop operations out in rural Georgia are actually, I mean, these are the folks who run the railroad. And so, I mean, I'm honored to be able to serve them here to try to tell our story and tell their story because they can't be here in person. But they're out there, and they are rural Georgia. They're the folks who go to the store, the supermarket, they go to the church, and they see their customers there, and they know them. And if they don't provide good service, they're going to hear about it, folks. That's what that kind of customer service does, and it's very valuable, and we're really glad to be a part of it.
You know, just one other thing, when it comes to locating facilities too, the relationship that we have with the local economic development folks is very important. A lot of times you see a railroad out there and you say, and you might see property next to that railroad and say, this might be a great place to locate a new industry. That's not always the case. So we work really closely with the local economic development folks here in South Georgia, as well as with the State Department of Economic Development, to make sure that we're marketing the proper rail serve locations, because not every spot is a good location. And that's, from an education standpoint, that's something that's very important from a Class 1 perspective. And sometimes it works a little bit better for the short lines, but that's something to take in mind as well.
If I may add to what Craig just said, because that's absolutely true. I mean, you have to look at the reality of the situation. I'm very glad to say that a lot of our short lines, if you were able to look at that map a little closer, they actually are served by several Class 1 railroads. So they can go to different places and actually be more competitive. And you can actually work with 2 railroads, 3 railroads. In one of my short lines, we have 5 connections to Class 1s. So when you look at that, there's options for shippers. And that adds value to what they do, and they're more competitive. So again, short lines can provide that to you all over the state.
Give it up.
Chairman Powell, you're next.
C. Nancy, on the funding side,
Yes, sir.
tell me how, in the department, is this money dedicated, or is it just allocated out of House Bill 170 money?
No,
How
sir,
does all this happen?
No, sir, these come through as state bonds that are appropriated, and generally, when they are appropriated to the department, they come with a description of which rail line they are to support, and generally with a description. And those typically come because we have sent a priority list of needs to the OPB, and we're not sure which portions of the priority list are chosen for funding. We don't know which ones are going to be chosen for funding until they show up in the.
So just regular transportation funding is not available for
No,
this?
sir. No, sir.
And this is all bond money?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Connor Poe. I'm with Norfolk Southern. I'm the new guy, so I'm going to let these guys handle a lot of it. But you brought up 170. I did want to mention that Craig and I actually had a meeting recently over at GDOT to discuss using House Bill 170 funds for grade crossing surfacing. GDOT's already getting a little bit of the money from that. I mean, the surfacing department's actually, that group's getting some of the money.
It's not our group. It's not intermodal.
It's not intermodal, but
It's not us. Grade crossing.
Grade crossing, yeah, grade crossing. So we are working with Jay Roberts and the folks at GDOT to continue that discussion and see if we can get to a lot of our surrounding states, if I'm not mistaken, do North Carolina, other states do use that for surface maintenance.
Well, with Jay Roberts involved, we're just not sure that anything's going to get done. So, I'm a rail fan, and I know the answer to the question I'm about to ask, but I'm going to ask our two Class 1 guys to define what a Class 1 railroad is, if you don't mind, for everyone else. And Connor's going to defer to Craig.
So your Class 1 railroads on the eastern, basically you draw a line from New Orleans to Chicago to Detroit. Class 1s in that particular part of the nation are Norfolk Southern and CSX. Class 1 railroads are those that are multi-state, that operate through and certain, I forget the number of miles, Joe, you can remember how many it is.
The definition, remember, the SPV said
That's
it's actually a financial one in revenue.
Yeah,
And that's how they
greater
determine
than
it.
X.
But they're usually
Yeah.
very large
Yeah.
because of that, but you're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Former Union Pacific Class 1 employed here as well. And then your short line revenue is based on,
Yeah, same thing. I mean, you're looking at about, I think it's under 150 million, whatever that might be, but the typical short line is 32 miles long, and when you're talking about Class 1s, you're talking about 21,000 miles and above. I mean, I think when I used to work at Union Pacific, we figured out that it was the trackage was the equivalent of the federal highway system. I mean, it was amazing.
in Georgia, CSX is about 1,600 miles, Norfolk Southern is about 1,700 miles.
One of the other facts that you guys may or may not know is that Georgia is number 7 in terms of rail miles out of the 50 states. So, and we are within the top 10 tier carloads delivered. I mean, wages, you name it, and we're within the top 10. So shame on us if we don't find a way to leverage a great asset that we have to support interconnectivity and taking traffic off the highways.
So if we've got 1,600 in CSX, 1,700 in Norfolk Southern, what's the total short line?
I think the total is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's around 1,100 or something like that, and 1,100 miles or so. And understand too, though, that there are other states that are competing with Georgia that do have some programs that are pretty helpful to short lines. And
Like what?
well, Virginia, for example, North Carolina, Florida, they invest quite a bit, and particularly in some of the operations that are near ports. Quite frankly, they are very aggressive that way. And I think Georgia is a very well-positioned state to compete and blow them out of the water if you really wanted to. And I think you're trying to do that. And again, I would look at those examples of how they are aggressively supporting short lines.
You've got, and I'll speak for GDOT on this, and what you have when he talks about North Carolina, Florida, Virginia, you have rail programs in those states, staffs that are, 50, 60 people at those DOTs that are dedicated to working with freight rail, working with the Class 1s and the short lines, and Nancy and Carol, and they do a great job. They do a great job, but when you look at the staff comparisons, the amount of money that they'd have to work with, it's woefully low compared to some of the other states, particularly those states in the South. I will say too, when you talk about ports, when we go to other states, and we serve, both of us, NS and CSX serve every single port up the East Coast, we go back and we talk about this is how you should do it, how it's done in Georgia. 2 on-dock facilities, both Norfolk Southern and CSX. You don't have that in other states, also served by a short line. This Mid-American Arc that Lee just spoke about, these guys are groundbreaking with what they're doing, and you're going to be able to reach such a significant part of the nation just through freight rail. That's the way the port thinks. For the state to be also, I think that's the way the state wants to think, but I think from a resource standpoint, they're limited in what they can do, but they do a great job.
All right, Darlene.
We do, we are moving coal, though.
Wait. Will you repeat the question? I couldn't hear.
Sure. The question was what types of commodities are moved by the railroad. So here in Georgia, we move a lot of agriculture products, we move coal, we move automobiles. What is also a growing part is what we call intermodal service, which is also merchandise service. So you refrigerators, Nintendo games, tennis shoes, refrigerated cars. You might see the juice train that runs up from Florida up through Georgia. We move that. There basically, it's touched by, if it's touched by you, it's touched by the railroad at some point. I mean, chances are everyone that drove their car today, that was moved out of the facility by the railroad industry. Like I said, the refrigerators, you turn on those lights, the coal, has a lot to do with that. We move, and we're looking at some of the things that we're looking at is rolled paper. The Georgia biomass, the wood pellets that come right here in Waycross are shipped by CSX to the port where they're sent on to Germany, which is used right now in fuel production. Kia Motors, one of the biggest gets for the state in the last few years, located because it was on a CSX line, and Norfolk Southern has plenty of other opportunities as well. So it really spans the marketplace.
I was also going to add that with the short lines, we're also able to move smaller stuff. I mean, we will actually use box cars to put things in for customers that usually would normally use truck. And now Craig and Connor can talk about this with more authority than I can, but one intermodal train which has double stacked containers that you usually see on the highways, they take as many as 200, 300 trucks off the road. And we actually can take 3 or 4 trucks off the road with our little railroads in some locations. But you can also have a lot of mixed type of goods in there. I mean, we're talking about a tile manufacturer in some small community in a rural part of the state would use that service to be able to get their goods to market.
And just one other too, from a chemical standpoint. As an example, carpet yarn manufacturing up in Dalton. A lot of the chemicals that go into manufacturing carpet yarns are moved by the railroad.
I actually have some numbers with regard to the state's short lines. Up in Chattanooga and Chickamauga, ranges from floor manufacturing, textile manufacturing, agriculture, plastics extrusion, and construction materials. We get to the heart of Georgia line, and we're talking lumber, oil, fuel distribution, peanut sheller, rail car repair, cross ties, feed manufacturing, wood pellets. Down at Georgia Southwestern, we're talking peanuts, asphalt, flooring, carpet, and one more, protein feed products, agricultural. So a wide diversity of products in using our short lines.
And those are also products that in many cases do need that extra capacity. They would benefit from that because you may have some cargo that just doesn't need to be that heavy, but many of the ones that Nancy and Craig just mentioned would need that capacity. Absolutely.
Clay?
Thank you, sir. As far as the continual upkeep of the state owns what, 500 miles? How many about yes, 500 miles of, yes, of that we own. Right. If there was a rail line that ran from Chairman Powell to the front here, and however many cross ties there are, and the ribbon rail or whatever that is, the continuous rail, the ongoing upkeep just to keep like per mile or per, how much is that? Because the railroad, the rail ties, now they take every third out or something every so often, but I mean, how much is that? Is this something that continues on, or is it?
Yes, Representative, absolutely. I think the issue here is what state of track condition you want to maintain it at. If you are a Class 1 railroad, they have very high standards of speed and weights and things that they need, so the cost will be a heck of a lot higher than it would be for a short line that only needs to go 10 miles an hour, again, safely, but the maintenance would not be as high as what they have to go 60, 70 miles an hour. So it would vary significantly, but we still have to maintain them to some extent.
Let's say 25, not looking at going 40, 50 miles an hour, but 25 miles an hour, 20 or 25 miles an hour, continual upkeep. How much would it cost per mile?
You know, I've got some numbers for one particular railroad. I could share that with you, but I'm going to have to run the numbers through my head a little bit because it's a relatively new railroad that we're operating. But let me put it to you this way. It could be as much as, I'm a little concerned about sharing that number. I need to think about it a little bit. I apologize.
Representative Perkle, Ryan Petey, who's going to follow us, can speak to this further, but I think from an industry standard standpoint, I think the maintenance standpoint, we're looking at 5 to 10 million for maintenance to maintain a mile. To construct a new mile would be 15,000, 5 to 10,000. We'll let our expert get up here in a few minutes. Brian is an expert and a consultant for the industry who is going to be speaking to some of that very shortly. So if you hold that, we'll get back with you on that.
Tom?
That will be annually.
Thanks, sir. Kind of to answer Darlene's question, agriculture couldn't survive in this state without the railroads all the way from the 50-unit trains that bring corn to the chicken feed mills out of the Midwest to hauling chemicals like Craig was talking about. I guess this is to Craig, and I want to know if there's anything we can do. I spent a half a morning at Premium Peanut, the largest sheller in the world, last week. And besides peanuts and besides what a fantastic guy Craig Camuso is, you know what the rest of the conversation was about. Is there anything that the crowd sitting around this table can do to help you expedite the problems that the largest sheller that's fixing to expand can do?
Sure, and and Premium Peanut, again, is one of the best economic development gets for the state, in the last decade or so, located in Douglas, Georgia. And we have instituted at CSX a new operation model, and over the last couple of months, it's been met with some challenges as we work through those. What we've been doing and what we continue to try to do is stay in touch with the executives there. As a matter of fact, we met with them, I think, just last week. Well, that's good. You can talk to my wife here shortly. That'd be good. But we meet with them to understand the challenges that they're facing. Also went over the expansion that is planned, and we're well aware of that, and understand how important Premium Peanut is not only to Georgia but to the customers that they serve nationally. So we continue to work through those. I'm not going to wood here and say I hope it's going to get better. And just staying, I think the challenge that we have is make sure that we're staying in constant contact with the executives there. Mr. Zimmer, I think is his name, is a great guy and has been very open with us about the challenges that they face and taking those back to our operations and making sure that we're instituting the concerns that they have into this new operation model that we're currently implementing.
He was telling us that he was in China a while back, and when he introduced himself and told him who he worked with, the first thing they said was, "Yeah, y'all have the dangerous railroad crossing." So it's getting all the way to China, and I just didn't know if there's anything that we as a state could do to help you. That's all I was asking.
No, we appreciate it. Listen, I appreciate the support, and I think we all at this table appreciate the support that you guys give us, especially in the rural areas. And I'll be sure to call on you if we need you, and certainly would appreciate that support. Thanks.
Rick?
I got a question. I was looking at the bond pack, I guess what I'm calling it now is a bond package on the short-range rail projects. It's about $42 million. Is this what you would expect and will need every year? Or is this, once you got this, next year what would it be? I guess it goes along with what Representative Perkle says. What's our look at responsibility or need in this world?
I think the best answer I can give you, sir, is that that's what's been identified as what is needed now. I think if we were really smart with our funding, we will try to identify some federal funding opportunities, and we would take advantage of some federal funds, and so we would only be matching maybe 20% or 30% and getting some federal funds. And also, hopefully we would be, once we got our infrastructure up to Class 2 standards, we would work very hard to maintain that and hopefully find some innovations and some efficiencies. And so I can't tell you that it would be $42 million every year, but that is what's been identified, what is required now to get us up to Class 2 standards. But I would hope that we would take advantage of some federal funding opportunities and slash that number over time.
What would be the federal match, Ms. Nancy, on, what do they do?
The most recent conversation I had with Federal Rail Administration folks, kind of went something like this. Well, the requirement is 20%, but you know that the best projects are going to match more than 20%, and they'll score more competitively. So that's the game we're up against, is that, we know we've got to put in a 20% state match. We can go a little higher than that. But it also comes down to making a compelling argument. And I think we have a tremendous compelling argument here in Georgia. And we've not received any funding from FRA to support our short lines. So I think they would look favorably upon us. But I do think that anything we could do beyond 20% would be beneficial.
Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nancy, I was just curious to kind of piggyback off of Rick's question, because I had the same question looking at this list. And you've already answered that, but what kind of revenue do we currently get off of our state-owned rail system?
We have leases with all 6 of our operators, and those leases generally have a fixed amount plus a variable based on the carload count. We have recently upgraded that and looked to other states to identify what was a model that worked for them. And so an example for you, the Heart of Georgia right now is a fixed of $75,000 annually, and then a variable of $11 per carload, I believe, beyond X. Some of our operators, for example, Ageechee Rail has 22 miles down in Sylvania, Newington area. They have just a few customers. Theirs is 10,000. And it's a slippery slope, because you can't lease them to the point of they don't make a profit.
Right.
So we have to take their annual reports, and we have to look at the model of what their expenses are, and then we also have to look at the state's return on investment, and we try to make a common denominator, if you will, in terms of what the fixed cost, what the fixed rate is based on the number of miles, XYZ, and then a variable rate beyond X. So we've tried to be as fair and as transparent as possible, but also recognizing that a 230-something mile short line, the Heart of Georgia, is not comparable to a 22-mile line with only a handful of customers.
So basically,
Did that answer your question?
but basically, yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I was expecting. There's no way we're going to get revenue.
I think the total last year in FY16 was somewhere around 250,000, maybe, And that money goes into what is called an R&M account, repair and maintenance account, which is incorporated into each of the leases, the languages, into each of the leases that are executed with our operators. We escrow that money in their R&M account, and they are able to draw that money down for any type of critical emergency. For example, I think the Heart of Georgia just used $527,000 or thereafter for some emergency work.
Some crossing work that needed to be done correctly, and that's a safety issue.
Right, but the funding is not there to do the type of wholesale improvements that we need.
Or to finance the bonds.
Right.
So we just got to realize we're doing this to incentivize industrial development in the rural parts of the state.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Representative Jaspers, I appreciate you referring to that document. I just want to give you the association's perspective and background on that. That is part of a document of an exhibit from this 2015 annual report that Nancy and Carol and their team put together. Tremendous document. A lot of work went into it, a lot of return on investment type analysis. And they came up with that short-term list. There's a long-term list as well. been through the effort, the appropriations chair and the leadership and others who looked at specific projects, and the specific project that Craig mentioned a moment ago where it just gets to a point where it has to be done. And so we looked at it and wanted to put together a program that was similar to what Craig mentioned is the case in some of these other states. And really, the result of that was Senate Bill 89 that passed the Senate last year and is now over in Chairman Tanner's committee. And basically what that does is create something called the Freight Rail Program. And what that does is that it would give this legislature an opportunity to put dollars into that program to be used very similarly by the GDOT, very similarly to what they do with 170 money, where they go down their list of priorities and pull projects off that list. And part of the reason that I shared that list was that if you look at those projects, they're relatively small, they're all over the state, and they make a big difference in that connectivity that Joe was talking about earlier. So we think that is most of the problems that have been brought to you all over the last several months, the money amounts start to be, it's $1 billion here. I think Seth quoted $5.4 billion in infrastructure needs. I think if you look at the report that the state came up with, not our industry, I mean, you're looking at something in the line of 40 million in short term, and then you look at their long-term projects, it's something that's very doable. It's in the millions, it's not in the billions, and it can make a real difference in how and whether freight rail is able to do their part to create that network that Lee and Seth and Janet and others were talking about earlier. So we think that's very important that we do that. That bill's going to be over, and it's subject to appropriations. The case needs to be made on whether or not we're going to pull money out of the general fund and put into that program. But as it stands right now, unless one of our individual companies go in and lobby for a particular project in a particular area and there's a bond that goes along with that, it simply is just not happening. And so we think that's a very important project. The second thing, and this is what Ryan Keys is going to speak to in a moment, has to do with private owned short lines and Class 1 rail in rural areas, and it involves a tax credit. And Chairman Powell asked a little earlier, so how do we know what the ROI is? Well, with the tax credit, you know that there's a good ROI because the private company has done that analysis. Before they're going to make an investment in Washington, Georgia, or in Willacoochee, or in any of these places where our short lines operate, they're going to do the analysis and make sure the business is there or the prospect for the business is there. And with it being a 50% tax credit that Ron's going to explain in a moment, it's something that we think is very developing.
If I could just add one more, Chairman Powell, and I think we've talked to a couple of people over here in the committee. Georgia is one of only 4 states that still charges a sales tax for diesel fuel for locomotives. So that's funds that could assist both the short lines and the Class 1s. And we're, again, not talking about a lot of money, but this is funds that go just into the general fund. That money could be reinvested back into the state and could be reinvested back into rural Georgia, and especially with the short lines, could benefit and reinvest that. And that's something that we've talked about over the years, and more than happy to discuss again as we move forward.
Well, and the good news is on the tax credit that Ryan will be talking about is that you are having to invest into your infrastructure to get the tax credit. So it's an incentive to invest in fixed rail lines, bridges, et cetera, to be able to get that as well. But he'll go into more detail.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a perfect segue of what I was thinking. First of all, I always joke about the only phrase I've never heard is "thank you, I'm fully funded." I've never heard that at the Capitol ever. But the skin in the game part, we always talk about the federal match and the state match and the this. And I promise you, if you build it, the jobs will come. Always makes me a hair nervous. We know that some of the GDOT jobs that were promised in certain regions didn't quite meet the high level of expectation that was told. So with that said, do y'all ever talk amongst your organization about what if we, whether it's through that fuel tax that we're talking about, or maybe per miles by your customers, why don't we charge a rail tax like a hotel tax with a promise and the commitment, since we have the skin in the game, that would be matched by the state? or perhaps rebated per every X amount of jobs created? In other words, that would show a front-end commitment on yours with the promise on the back. If it was earmarked and you're charging your own people, hey, let's show the state more serious.
It's an excellent point. One thing that we do with new manufacturers that are looking to have, get rail service, they want a spur. So what we will do is we will charge that company for the spur, but then we rebate them back based on usage. Because what we saw years ago is industries would come in and say, we want that spur. The railroad company builds the spur, and then the company turns around to the trucking company and says, hey, we got a rail spur if you don't give us lower rates.
Well, we've seen it when we build the spur and then they closed.
That's right. That's right. So what we do now, that's kind of the incentive with the customer is, we'll put the spur in, we'll put the switch in, but you're going to pay for it. However, you'll be rebated back as you use them.
To me, I would just consider it almost a doubling or whatever based on the agreement you have with appropriations on potential match. That if our own people that are driving and riding and getting the products are bringing this much to the table, the state's going to give us this, I think that'd be a great sell for you to be able to make to the legislature.
If I may add to that, we make carload demands of our customers. They have to meet those carloads in order for us to invest in what they need for operating and getting rail service. The challenge is, keep in mind that the state of Georgia does not provide financial assistance in any way, shape, or form to private railroads.
Right.
It is not done. So we're talking about state-owned railroads that it's an asset of the state too, and we do invest in private railroads that operate some of those state-owned railroads do invest our own money to be able to serve our customers. So that is actually to some extent happening, and we are making meeting those obligations. So on the state side,
what I'm asking is how much are you raising within your own organization that you want to show to the state that you created jobs with, return on investment? I guess I'm just looking for another creative way of doing that $5 hotel tax.
I see what you're saying.
And saying, look, we're putting money in the game matches.
Gotcha. If I may add to Nancy, you had talked about a 20% match. Is this on the Tigers and some of those types of programs? I think, unfortunately, things have changed to the point where now I've actually talked to some folks at USDOT who are thinking, you know what, if you wanted to do a rail project, you're going to have to go as high as a 60% match. I know in one state, Ford is putting an 80% match. If you're putting an 80% match, you're going to do that project anyway. You probably don't really need them. I mean, that's the kind of challenge that we're running against these days.
We're going to wind up this section. I was reminded when you were talking about the mom and pop character of the short lines.
That there's a short line that runs through Camilla connecting Albany and Thomasville, and it's really advantageous to our shippers because they can either connect with CSX or Norfolk Southern, and that's very, very helpful. There are two main crossings into Camilla that feed into town, and certainly if the train blocks those tracks, it interferes with traffic, and it also interferes with the emergency services that you have to furnish. And so several years ago, we partnered with DOT and arranged to have switching moved to the south side of Camilla, and we built like a 3-ladder track there so that all switching would not block those two main thoroughfares. And after that project was completed, for several weeks, we still had trains blocking those two crossings, and got a lot of complaints because of that, because certainly after that big project, then all the switching should have moved south of town, and it evidently had not. So one day I called the city manager and I said, send somebody down there to find out why that train is blocking those crossings because of the fact that we have moved switching south of town. He called me back a little while later and said, they've built a new hot dog stand out there next to the railroad, and they stopped for lunch.
Those are some good hot dogs.
So it is a different environment, but they definitely serve a purpose because the industry we have in Mitchell County could not survive without the access to the short line. Thank you all very much for your presentation.
Okay, our next presenter coming up is going to discuss some of the tax credit issues that were just mentioned. And I hope I get his last name right, Ryan Pitty. All right, good deal. He joined the Mickelson and Company in May of 2008 and has been helping, I think, nationwide basically work on railroad tax credit finance practices. So, Ryan, we welcome you. And
thank you for being with us. And just know that you're between us and something. No, I'm just kidding. Take what time you need here, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. It is always dangerous being the last one of the day. So I'll try to be brief. I know a lot of folks have hit on lots of different topics with respect to infrastructure, and everyone's getting a little bit tired. So before we start, though, everybody in the audience here, I want to show of hands. How many folks have actually been on a railroad? How many have been on a short line railroad? Still a fair number, okay? How many of you here have some type of chamber or economic development affiliation back in your home district or hometown? A lot, okay. So what I'm going to talk about is going to cover a lot of that, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about short line railroads, I'm going to take this out. We're talking about short line railroads and railroad infrastructure. It's all about jobs and it's all about economic development. So we'll get into it here. Is this thing?
Yeah. To the right.
The right? All right, Mickelson and Company. So I'm Ryan Pitty, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You're probably wondering how in the world somebody from South Dakota ends up working with railroads. We, about 2004, 2005 time frame, one of the largest short lines in the country at the time. It was headquartered in Sioux Falls, and there was a new federal tax credit program that was available. And we were already involved in some industrial development, finance, and finance consulting work. They said, hey, there's this tax credit, we need to try to figure out how to do it, can you help us? And so we did some consulting work, we helped them figure out how to take advantage of the program, and from there, we've really expanded our practice and now work with a couple hundred short lines across the country. We have a number of clients here in Georgia that are listed there at the bottom, and so we've got a pretty good familiarity with the lay of the land and the state and some of the specific issues related to infrastructure of the short lines. And so, and I forgot to mention, we are very active on the legislative front with the National Association with the Tax Credit, and we're involved in some other states. The counterpart that I work with in Sioux Falls, Mark Mickelson, is actually the Speaker of the House in South Dakota, so we've got some idea of kind of how some of the legislative stuff works, although from a South Dakota perspective. So I'm going to talk real high level about the U.S. freight market, kind of how short lines interplay with that, and then really, you know, what are some of the infrastructure needs specifically, and then, you know, how do you pay for it? And what are some creative things that we've seen that work? So if you take a look at, this thing doesn't want to work. Is it easier if I just tell you to turn the slide? I can do it. You do that? So if you take a look at the National Freight Network, there's 610 railroads across the country, comprising 140,000 track miles, and a lot of traffic is moving, a lot of different commodities. We like to think of it as a lot of the bulk commodities, so your grains, your, you know, coal, etc. 2.2 billion tons of freight annually. If you took away the National Freight Network and you tried to put it all on the road, it'd be the equivalent of having 122 million trucks on the road. If you take a look at short line perspective, as folks talk about, hey, what are short lines? Really, in Georgia was part of the history here. 1980, President Carter signed the Staggers Act, which deregulated the rail industry and
same fund.
Estimated $36 million paid in state and local taxes. That doesn't include income taxes, and a direct economic impact of $2.4 billion annually. And so you can get into some funny math real fast with an in-plan model and different economic forecasting. But this is from the state freight rail plan and also in conjunction with the AAR. And so that's just freight rail. We're not talking about passenger rail. So that's a pretty significant impact. So what is moving by rail in the state of Georgia? Ag, food products, intermodal is a significant part of your traffic mix. Of the 3.9 million carloads moving annually in Georgia, close to half of that's going to end up being intermodal. Over 200 billion in freight moving annually. If you took away theoretically the freight rail system in Georgia, that'd be like putting an additional 7.5 million trucks on the road, which think of kind of what the congestion of that would look like. One thing I want to point out is when in 1980, if you looked at what was being moved by freight rail in the state, we're pretty much at a double for what's being moved by rail in terms of carloads and value. And if you project out in the future by 2050, we're looking at about another double. And so I'm pointing this out because you're going to be looking at a freight rail system that you've got and realize that there's going to continue to be a lot of stress on it if you're going to move 335 million tons of freight a year. So a lot of times people will ask, well, I see I'm familiar with seeing stuff going down the road, but really what's the economic impact? And so this is a slide from the AAR, but I think it really highlights if you have one rail car of wheat, which is about 100 tons, let's say, or 3,500 bushels, that's enough for 258,000 loaves of bread. I don't eat much tofu, but if you get down to the barley, 94,000 gallons of beer in a rail car, that's pretty much the equivalent of 40,000 cases of beer, which I don't think they'll go through that much at the Georgia-Florida game this weekend, but they'll sure try. Next slide. So when we're talking about railroads, it is all about the railroad customers. They come in all shapes and sizes. It could be 2 employees, it could be 10 employees. And the common theme from it is if you do not have adequate rail infrastructure in place, you're not going to have customers, you're not going to be in business, and that's got a revolving ripple effect on the local level, larger than you can point by just having a slide. So the biggest challenge is really how do we reinvest to meet the infrastructure needs that we have, because it's ongoing. So there was a question before about, what does this cost? And it really depends a lot on what was the condition of the track when I got a hold of it, what kind of deferred maintenance did we have. We like to think in terms of, depending on geography, that railroads on average are spending around $10,000 to $15,000 a mile just on maintenance. And that means we're fixing ties, we're fixing rail, we're doing the things we need to do to move the cars down the road. So new track, $1.5 million a mile. Bridges are a huge challenge for the railroads. You're looking at maybe fixing some stringers, doing just some small structural things that might cost you $100,000 a bridge. If I'm replacing an entire bridge, you're starting at $1 million and it's going up from there. So the cost can add up quickly, and you might have a bridge that's in good shape and something might happen and all of a sudden you've got to go out and repair it. It's an ongoing issue. So there's been a lot that's been reinvested in the rail infrastructure nationwide and in Georgia. The needs for reinvestment are going to continue to be significant, especially as we continue to accommodate 286 compatible cars. And really the key to economic development is being able to handle these heavier freight rail cars. And so 286K, it's really easy to throw that number around, but really just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, it's the industry standard rail car weight for bulk commodities is 286,000 pounds, okay? 91% of the freight that moves in this country is bulk commodities. The class 1s, for the most part, are all 286 capable. In fact, they're probably, above that. 50% of the short lines in the U.S. are not 286 capable, and it's a huge disadvantage. I don't know if I have this right, but I think in Georgia there's just a couple subdivisions for CSX and NS that are not 286 capable, but they're pretty close. The short lines, this is hard to see. When you're making a presentation, you think a map's going to be easy to see, but the lines up here that are highlighted in green are the track miles, short line track miles in the state of Georgia that are not 286 capable today. Okay? And I think that Georgia Southwestern, there's some parts there, but it's from the state freight rail plan. It'll give you an idea of there's some work that needs to be done. So the 2015 Georgia Freight Rail Plan surveyed a bunch of different folks, a bunch of different railroads, and if you look in that plan, this table's a little bit different because I'm just focusing on freight. And so two big numbers here, 2016 to 2019, 77 million a year, roughly, to fix short-term needs on these railroads. But the bigger number that should scare you is $1.3 billion in rail infrastructure needs the next 25 years. It's about 54 million or in change. I think that number's accurate. I think if you talk to some of the short lines, the number could be higher because we've got a lag in the data that was provided. This was like circa 13-14 data for a 2015 plan. And one of the things that, a big component of this is trying to make that jump to 286K, but what's not factored into it is if you end up becoming 286K capable, the industry, if you talk to the track maintenance or engineer folks, and that's not what I am, they all say the trade-off for going to 286K is our annual maintenance costs go up roughly 17% because you're handling heavier cars, you got more wear and tear, and it's just something to consider. So before I get into this, you take a look at it and you're like, hey, well, what funding solutions really exist today? There is not a dedicated freight rail funding solution on the federal level. There's not a dedicated freight rail funding solution on the state level. Now you'll hear people talk about the Tiger Grant or RIF loans and all those sorts of things, and those things are really effective if you're able to navigate the political waters to actually get the grant or get the loan. And so they're cumbersome and haven't worked all that well. The one program that has worked really well, and it's focused on a private sector solution, has been the 45G tax credit. This was introduced in 2005 as a way for short lines to have incentive to reinvest in their track infrastructure, but have it be based off of, what are their priorities and what are their needs and, what are the customer needs. And so how the program works is it's a 50% tax credit for what you
spend on qualified track maintenance and capital improvement work, capped at $3,500 a track mile. So if I'm a railroad with 100 miles of track, I potentially have a $350,000 tax credit, provided that I spend $700,000 or more on qualified maintenance to generate the credit. What's unique about this credit in the IRS code compared to some of the other tax credit provisions is that you can do one of several things with the credit. You can keep it to offset your federal income tax bill, or you can assign the credit and the associated track miles to a customer, a shipper, or a vendor. And that assignability feature in the code has really led to significant reinvestment in the industry. $3 billion plus since 2005. This program's worked really well, but where there's been challenges, we've been subject to the political headwinds in DC on, should this get extended or not? And a lot of times it's a 1 or 2 year extension that takes place December 18th, and of the 2-year extension, one of the years is retroactive to the beginning of the year. And so if you're a railroad and you got the credit on the books, you can go spend a lot of money and make the necessary improvements, but if this isn't on the books, it's a real hard thing to do any planning. The Railway Tie Association has provided some data to the rail industry that says in the years where there's a full year of planning that allows for the short lines to take advantage of the 45G tax credit, the tie vendors in this country sell 1.2 million more ties on average than in the years when the credit gets extended right toward the end of the year. So if this is something that's really worked. The legislative uncertainty is pretty significant. This slide's a little bit dated to the right there, but there's a bill that's been out there to make this credit permanent. Probably not going to happen in this political environment, but I think the thing that is interesting about it is there are 55 senators that have signed on to co-sponsor this bill and 248 members of the House. It's the most sponsored piece of tax legislation out there. This is what it looks like from the Georgia delegation. So your congressional folks are very aware of how this program worked and what the benefits are. There's a particular senator that's absent from this. I've been in a couple different meetings in DC with his staff, and if anybody wants to talk to the senator about joining the group, we'd love that. So this has got broad support, because what happens is the members of Congress go out to their district and they can see firsthand that the money is being spent and and jobs are being created. On top of it, there are 65 rail customers in the state that are part of a group called Saving Our Service, and they've also been active politically and said, hey, this is something that works and you should support it. So once this program got started in 2006, there were a couple railroads in a few different states that said, you know what, this really works great. How about we try to develop some continuity here and replicate it on the state level? So a rural railroad in Oklahoma that had a couple hundred miles of track went to their local state legislators and said, we should try to replicate this program in Oklahoma. They did so in 2006. At the time, the budget scenario in Oklahoma was pretty good. The energy environment was doing pretty well. They had about 10 other state tax credit programs that existed, so this wasn't really recreating anything new. This credit's, in addition to the federal credit, it's $2,000 a mile versus $3,500 a mile, and you can claim the credit or you can assign it to any taxpayer in the state. This has resulted in significant reinvestment in the state of Oklahoma. I have a particular client who's been trying to get their track up to 286 just to accommodate their grain customers, and those efforts actually resulted in attracting a large oil company to locate a terminal and do some different frac sand stuff. And this railroad went from 4 years ago barely breaking even to their record year in 35 years of operation. And it's because they had some customer needs and they had a tool in place to go make the reinvestment. State of Kentucky, 2009, similar deal. They had some existing state tax credit programs that worked, and they passed a program worth $3,500 a mile. This completely mirrors the federal program, and it's worked very, very well. There are a couple other sort of rail-related tax credit programs with respect to renewable fuels, but this is the main one that's driven a lot of reinvestment for them. So we've been working with the Short Line Association and saying, okay, with the legislative uncertainty that we have, you know, where else could we try to do this? And so we've been talking to states that have a high concentration of railroads, an active association, existing tax credit markets. We had a bill in Texas earlier this year that got introduced. We had really broad support. Their Ways and Means Committee had direction to not release anything out of the committee that had a cost to it. And so we're hopeful for our next round, but 2018, these are the states where we're targeting legislation to try to replicate this. In early 2000s, the film industry was starting to do tax credit programs. I know that program is really big here in the state of Georgia. Well, in 2002, there were 4 states that had film-related tax credit programs, and today there are 41. So that's just something that's worked for that industry, and we'd like to try to do that for rail. So what would this look like if we implemented a state railroad tax credit program in Georgia? So if you had a 50% tax credit capped at $3,500 a mile, we've got kind of the example I ran through you before. The assignment feature has been pretty critical for reinvestment. But if you had 100 miles, you potentially have a $350,000 tax credit. The thing about this program that's really made it work is you have to spend the money to get the tax credit. So if I have a railroad with 100 miles of track and I only go spend
$200,000 on track maintenance, I only have a $100,000 tax credit. I've kind of missed out. But if I'm a 100-mile railroad and I go spend $2 million, I don't get to claim $1 million tax credit because I'm capped on a per mile basis. So 1,600 short line miles at $3,500 a mile would cost approximately $5.6 million a year. That assumes that the railroads all go spend the money to generate the credit, $11.2 million. So not a ton of cost in the grand scheme of the budget and some of the freight needs. A class 1 provision for rural infrastructure, I think that's something that's being openly discussed and not really sure what that would look like. But this is certainly a private sector solution for the rail shipper needs. So I'm going to wrap it up here shortly, but I just want to give you, kind of come back to some examples of railroad spending money and, you know, making improvements to accommodate jobs. So this is the Georgia Southern Railroad, 74 track miles. This railroad spends well above $10,000 a mile. It's actually probably closer to 14,000, somewhere in that vicinity. And in the last couple of years, they've had 5 different businesses located along the railroad. Is because they've been making investments that can accommodate, you know, 286K. And this is an example of a switch they installed for WL Plastics. It's 15 new jobs, 400 new carloads. And it doesn't seem like a lot when you look at it on paper, but this has been a big project. It was a multi-million-dollar investment. The railroad didn't have it in the budget to spend the money, but did anyway because you have to do that to keep up. And they've had some success. I think Brad Lefevers from the Heart of Georgia has articulated to me one time the whole freight reinvestment scenario. He said, you know, Ryan, I can't let my maintenance lapse for 1 year just because of a down year from one otherwise reliable shipper. I got to always do it, and I got to make the investments so I'm staying out ahead of what's going to work. So Georgia Southern, this is Georgia Northeastern. They're replacing some 90-pound rail to accommodate some of their customers that have some 286K demands. This is on the Hartwell out in Elbert County. They're a small railroad, but they just announced a new feed mill that's getting announced on that railroad, and they're constructing a spur for that. You got the Heart of Georgia, Georgia Central, the Cordial Inland Port. I think everybody's heard about that story, but it just kind of comes back to these success stories come in all shapes and sizes, and it's really about being prepared and making the investment. So at the end of the day, it's all about jobs, and the railroads just need to continue to make investments, or it's going to result in missed opportunities. And so we've seen this tax credit program work on the federal level in a couple states, and we know it'll work here too because it's a proven solution. And the biggest thing about it is not a handout. The railroads have to go spend the money to generate the credit. And what's unique about this is there's nothing political about it. It's the railroad choosing where they're going to make their investments based on their customer needs.
And so this is a legislative priority for the Georgia short lines, the Georgia railroads, frankly. And so we'll be planning to introduce a bill, and we'll be talking to you all about it, but we think this is something that could really work. And appreciate the time to be here today, and we look forward to hopefully your positive feedback and maybe seeing a suggestion in your report at the end of your study session that says this is something we should look at. Questions?
Anybody got any questions? Anybody got quiet? All right. Ryan, thank you. It doesn't appear if
Wind up with questions, we'll get in touch with you and let you know.
I'll be up at dinner tonight, and I'll be
Okay.
around. I'll leave my contact information here. It's on the last slide here. Well,
There we go.
thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Okay, any questions or comments from members of the committee or the council that are left? All right, 2 things real quick. members of the council and our staff, remember that, actually three things. Remember, the buses will be at the hotel at 5:30 to take us down to the swamp for dinner. One bus will leave at 5:30 and the other one shortly thereafter. In the morning, for members and staff, the city of Waycross will be hosting a breakfast here for us at 7 o'clock in the morning. And here at the auditorium. And the speaker will be here to visit with us and speak somewhere between 11 and 11:30 tomorrow as well to address the council. So with that, hotel is just right down the road for those of you that have not checked in already. And we will see you on the bus in a little bit.